She said she needed no man, until a drifter stopped at her gate. A man can ride 1,000 miles chasing the life he thinks he wants, then lose his whole plan beside a woman's broken fence. In the summer of 1887, the road into Willow Creek, Arkansas, ran between low green hills, dusty fields, and farms that held onto the land like old hands holding prayer. By noon, the sun sat high and hard over the valley, turning every wagon rut pale and dry. A gray horse moved slowly along that road, carrying a man who had no reason to stop. His name was Everett Hale. He was 33, broad-shouldered, quiet-eyed, and weathered in the way of men who had slept under more skies than roofs. His hat was faded at the brim, his coat was patched at one elbow, and his saddle held everything he owned that mattered. He was headed west toward Colorado, where a cattle outfit near Pueblo had promised him steady pay through winter. After years of working other men's land, Everett had started to believe that maybe a man's home was not a place. Maybe it was just the next job, the next bedroll, the next morning when his horse still had strength under him. He told himself that was enough. Then he saw the sunflowers. They stood along the south side of a small farm, tall and bright against the split-rail fence, their yellow faces turned toward the light as if they knew exactly what they were living for. Beyond them sat a white farmhouse with blue shutters, a low porch, and a roof that had seen better years. Behind it, a barn leaned just enough to make a carpenter uneasy. There was a kitchen garden beside the house, neat as a church pew, with beans climbing poles, squash spreading wide, and rows of peppers shining red and green beneath the sun. But the sunflowers were what made Everett slow his horse. They were too well cared for to be wild and too stubborn to look decorative. Someone had planted them with purpose. Someone had tied the tallest stalks with strips of cloth so the wind would not break them. Someone had cut back the weeds by hand. Then Everett heard a woman's voice. "You can bend if you must," she said from somewhere behind the flowers, "but if you break, don't expect me to feel sorry for you. I warned you yesterday." Everett sat still in the saddle. A moment later, a woman stepped into view with a tin pail in one hand and a small knife in the other. She wore a faded brown dress, work boots dusty at the toes, and a straw hat tied under her chin. A loose curl of dark auburn hair had slipped free near her cheek. There was dirt on her sleeve and a line of sweat at her temple, but she carried herself like the farm, the fence, the sky, and the stubborn sunflowers had all been placed under her care, and she did not plan to fail any of them. Her name was Nora Whitcomb, though Everett did not know it yet. She was 29 years old and had buried her husband 3 winters earlier beneath a cedar tree on the hill behind the orchard. Since then, every neighbor within 6 miles had told her some version of the same thing. A woman could not run a farm alone forever. A widow needed protection. A farm needed a man. Nora had listened, thanked them when manners required it, and gone right back to proving them wrong. She had planted corn when the mule went lame. She had patched the henhouse roof during a storm with rainwater running down her neck. She had bartered eggs for flour, mended harness leather by lamplight, and stood in the doorway with a shotgun once when 2 drunk men thought a widow's place was easy pickings. She had not fired it. She had not needed to. The look in her eyes had been enough. By that July, folks in Willow Creek had stopped saying she could not manage. They had started saying she was too proud to accept help. Nora called that an improvement. She looked up and found Everett watching from the road. For a breath, neither of them spoke. A horsefly buzzed near the fence. The gray horse shifted one hoof in the dust. Nora's hand tightened around the pail handle. "You lost?" she asked. Her voice was not rude, but it stood behind a locked door. "No, ma'am," Everett said, "just passing through." "Then you're doing it slowly." A faint corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Your sunflower on the end is leaning hard." Nora turned her head toward the last tall stalk by the fence. It was leaning, though she had already noticed it before he arrived. She looked back at him. "I know what it's doing." "I figured you did." "Then why mention it?" Everett glanced toward the road ahead, then back at the farm. "Habit, I suppose. I notice things that are about to fall." Something passed through her face then, quick and hidden. Not fear, not anger, a memory maybe. Whatever it was, she shut it away before he could understand it. "Well," she said, "unless you also notice a reason to stand there all afternoon, I have work." Everett nodded once. "Could I water my horse?" Nora studied him, not his face alone, but his hands, his boots, his saddle, the way he sat his horse. She had learned to read men by small things. This one did not look hungry for trouble. He looked tired in a deeper way, like a fence post that had held too long in wet ground. "The well's by the barn," she said. "Don't leave the gate open." He rode in slowly, opened the gate, led the gray through, and closed it behind him without being told twice. Nora noticed that. She wished she had not. At the well, Everett drew water for his horse. The bucket rope groaned. The gray drank deep, and Everett rested one hand on the animal's neck while he looked toward the barn. That was when the north fence gave a sharp crack. A section near the pasture sagged sideways, one post pulling loose from the earth. 3 goats lifted their heads as if they had been waiting for this exact invitation. Nora turned fast. "No." The smallest goat stepped forward. "No, Juniper," she snapped. Juniper did not care. Neither did the other 2. Everett set the bucket down. "They'll be in your beans in less than a minute." "I know that. I can hold them back while you fix the post." She gave him a look. "That post has needed digging out for 2 weeks. It won't be fixed in a minute." "Then I can fix it." "I didn't ask you to." "No, ma'am. I don't hire strangers." "I didn't ask to be hired." Nora stood there with the pail in her hand, jaw tight, pride wrestling with common sense, while 3 goats quietly prepared to ruin her afternoon. The wind moved through the sunflowers, making the tall heads nod like silent witnesses. At last she pointed toward the barn. "Tools are inside, west wall. If you steal anything, I'll know." Everett looked at her, and this time the smile did show, small and brief. "I believe you would." For the next 2 hours, Nora tried not to watch him. She failed more than once. Everett worked without making a show of it. He pulled the rotten post clean from the clay, dug the hole deeper, set a stronger post from the barn pile, and stretched the rail straight. He did not complain about the heat. He did not ask questions about her husband, her land, or why a woman was doing all this alone. He simply worked. That unsettled Nora more than advice would have. By late afternoon, the fence stood firm. The goats had lost their chance and seemed personally offended. Everett washed his hands at the pump while Nora came out with a cup of water. "You didn't have to do it right," she said. He took the cup. "A fence done wrong is just another problem waiting." She looked at the new post. It stood straight, solid, dependable. "I was going to fix it." "I know." "Don't say that like you don't believe me." "I do believe you." He handed the cup back. "I just figured you had enough things waiting on you." Nora's fingers closed around the tin cup. For some reason, that simple sentence found a tender place she had not allowed anyone near in years. She looked away first. "There's stew inside," she said, "if you want some before you go." Everett looked toward the western road. The sun was dropping behind the hills, turning the dusk gold. Colorado was still out there. Work was waiting. A life without roots was waiting. Then he looked back at the farm, the repaired fence, the bright sunflowers, and the woman who claimed she needed no one while carrying the weight of every living thing around her. "I'll eat," he said, "then I'll ride on." But as Nora turned toward the house, and Everett followed with dust on his boots and something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Neither of them knew that the road west had already begun to lose its hold on him. And by morning, one small kindness would become the first crack in both their lonely plans. Morning came soft over the Whitcomb farm, the kind of morning that made the land look kinder than it really was. A pale mist rested low in the pasture. Dew shone on the bean leaves. The sunflowers along the fence stood quiet and gold, their faces turning slowly toward the first light as if yesterday's troubles had never happened. Nora was awake before the rooster. That was nothing new. She had trained herself to rise before the farm started asking for things. There were eggs to gather, bread to set near the stove, water to draw, goats to feed, and beans to pick before the heat came down hard. She moved through the kitchen with the same quiet order she gave to everything else. Fire first, coffee next, biscuits after that. Only this morning, there was a man asleep in the barn. She had offered him the hayloft because darkness had fallen before supper was done, and because the road west was not a kind road after sundown. She had made the offer in a tone that suggested it was not softness, only sense. Everett had accepted with the same plain manner he did everything, thanked her, and gone out with his bedroll under one arm. Nora had locked the back door anyway. Then she had lain awake longer than she meant to, listening to the farm settle, to the goats moving once or twice, to the gray horse shifting in the barn. She told herself she was listening for trouble, but when no trouble came, she kept listening. Now, while the coffee boiled, she found herself looking toward the window above the dry sink. The barn doors were open. Everett was already outside. He stood near the pump in his shirt sleeves, splashing water over his face and hair. His movements were slow but practiced, like a man used to beginning his day wherever the night had left him. His gray horse stood saddled nearby, though the cinch was not yet drawn tight. Nora felt something small and foolish sink in her chest. Of course he was leaving. That was what men like Everett Hale did. They came from dust and went back to dust. They fixed a fence, ate a meal, slept under a borrowed roof, and rode on before anyone had time to expect their shadow across the yard. She turned from the window too quickly and burned 2 biscuits. By the time Everett stepped onto the porch, Nora had the ruined biscuits hidden under a cloth and 4 good ones on a plate. She opened the door before he knocked. "You're up early," she said. "So are you." "I live here." That would explain it. She did not smile, but it nearly happened. Everett stood with his hat in his hand. His damp hair had been pushed back from his forehead, and there was a clean red line along one cheek where he must have cut himself shaving by touch with a small mirror. He looked ready to leave, which made the kitchen feel colder than the stove allowed. "There's coffee," Nora said, "since I made enough." "Much obliged." He stepped in and took the cup she handed him. His eyes moved once around the kitchen, not nosy, just noticing. The scrubbed table, the stacked jars on the shelf, the blue dish with a crack down one side, carefully mended with wire, the empty chair opposite hers that had not been used regularly in 3 years. Nora saw him see it. She pulled her own chair back harder than needed. "You heading out after breakfast?" she asked. "That was the plan." "Was?" Everett looked into his coffee before answering. "Your barn roof has a bad corner." Nora went still. The words were simple, but they carried danger. Not danger from him. Danger from the part of her that was tired enough to hear help and want it. "I know about the roof." "I figured." "You say that a lot." "Because you seem to know most things before I mention them." "Then maybe you should stop mentioning them." Everett nodded as if that was fair. He took a drink of coffee, then looked toward the window where the barn roof showed beyond the yard. "If rain comes hard from the east, that corner will leak into your hay." "It has before." Then it'll do worse next time. Nora's jaw tightened. I don't have money to hire roof work. I didn't say hire. You fixed the vents. I did. And now you're studying the roof. Yes, ma'am. And after that, what? The barn latch, the smokehouse door, the loose step on the porch. Everett glanced toward the porch floor, left side. Nora stared at him. His mouth twitched. She looked away, angry because it was almost funny. I have managed this farm alone for 3 years, she said. I believe you. No, people say that when they mean the opposite. I'm not people. The kitchen went quiet. Outside, a rooster crowed late as if embarrassed to have missed his proper moment. The sound should have broken the tension, but it did not. Nora stood with one hand on the back of her chair and the other near her apron pocket, fingers worrying the seam. Everett set his cup down carefully. I'm not trying to make you smaller, he said. A person can be capable and still have too much on their shoulders. Nora did not answer. She wanted to tell him to go. She wanted to tell him there was no room on this farm for a stranger's pity. She wanted to say that she had already survived the hardest thing the world could hand her, and a leaking barn roof was nothing beside that. But the truth was, the roof worried her. It had worried her through every dark cloud since May. If you miss your road, she said, that's not my doing. No. And I won't be beholden to you. I didn't ask you to be. What do you want then? Everett was quiet for a moment. The question seemed to reach a place in him he had not expected to open. He looked down at his hands. There were old scars across his knuckles, pale against the brown of his skin. Hands that knew rains, rope, hammer, and weather. Hands that had likely built things in places he never stayed long enough to enjoy. I don't know, he said at last. Maybe just one day where I'm useful before I move on. Nora looked at him then, really looked. For the first time, she saw something beneath his steadiness. Not weakness, not need exactly. A weariness that had learned not to ask for comfort because comfort usually belonged to somebody else's house. She knew that feeling better than she wished. Fine, she said, one day. Everett lifted his eyes. One, Nora repeated. You patch that roof corner, fix nothing else unless I say it needs fixing, eat supper, sleep in the barn if it's too late, and ride out tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. And don't call me ma'am every time you breathe. It makes me feel 90. What should I call you? Nora. He nodded, Nora. Her name sounded different in his voice. Not sweet, not familiar, just careful, like something he had been trusted to hold without dropping. She turned to the stove before her face could betray her. Eat before the roof takes all day. The roof did take all day. Everett climbed up after breakfast with a hammer, nails, a stack of old boards, and a coil of rope Nora insisted he use because she had no wish to explain to the town how a drifter broke his neck on her barn. He worked under the rising sun while Nora moved through her chores below, pretending not to look up every few minutes. He stripped away the bad boards and found worse trouble beneath. Water had crept farther than the corner showed. The rot ran along one support beam, not enough to ruin the barn yet, but enough that another season would have made it costly. When he called down and told her, Nora closed her eyes. Of course it does, she muttered. I can shore it up. With what? He pointed toward a stack of timber behind the barn. Those. I was saving those for the chicken run. They'll save more hay here. She hated that he was right. By noon, heat shimmered above the yard. Nora brought him water and a cloth for his neck. He accepted both without comment, but when their fingers brushed around the cup, she drew back as if the tin had sparked. Everett noticed. He said nothing. That silence bothered her more than questions would have. By late afternoon, the corner of the barn was tight, the beam was braced, and the hay beneath it would see winter dry. Everett came down the ladder with dust in his hair, sweat darkening his shirt, and one splinter lodged deep in his palm. Nora caught sight of it when he reached for his coat. "Hold still. It's nothing." Men always say that before making something worse. He gave her his hand. She took it before she had time to think better of it. His palm was warm and rough, the skin lined from work. She bent over it with a needle, her brow tight in concentration. Everett stood still as fence wire, watching the top of her head, the loose strand of hair near her cheek, the way her mouth pressed slightly to one side when she focused. "There," she said, pulling the splinter free. He looked at his palm, then at her. "Thank you." Nora released his hand quickly. "You patched my roof. I pulled a splinter. That makes us even." "Not sure the math works that way." "It does on my farm." Everett smiled then, and this time she could not pretend she missed it. Supper was quiet but not uncomfortable. Nora made beans, cornbread, and fried potatoes. Everett ate like a man who respected food because he had gone without it enough times to know its worth. He did not flatter her cooking in a polished way. He only asked for another piece of cornbread, and somehow that meant more. Afterward, she stepped onto the porch to shake crumbs from the cloth. The sky had gone purple behind the hills. Fireflies blinked low over the grass. The repaired fence stood in the dimming light, and beyond it the sunflowers bowed their heavy heads for the night. Everett came out carrying his hat. "I'll leave at first light," he said. Nora nodded. That was what they had agreed. That was what was sensible. But the porch felt too quiet after he said it. "You have folks waiting in Colorado?" she asked. "An outfit waiting, not folks." "No family." He looked toward the road, none close enough to count. Nora held the cloth against her waist. She had not meant to ask more, but the evening made honest things easier and dangerous things harder to stop. "Doesn't that get lonely?" Everett took some time answering. "Sometimes," he said, "but lonely on the road is simple. You know what to blame." Nora understood that so well it hurt. Before she could answer, a sound came from the far side of the yard, a soft creak, then another. Both of them turned. Near the smokehouse, the loose porch step gave way under the weight of Juniper the goat, who had somehow escaped and was now standing with one hoof sunk through the broken board, looking personally betrayed. Nora stared. Everett looked at the goat, then at Nora. "You told me not to fix the step unless you said it needed fixing." Nora pressed her lips together. The goat bleated. Everett waited. At last Nora sighed, long and defeated. "It needs fixing." And there, beneath the first stars of the Arkansas night, Everett Hale laughed. Not loud, not careless, just enough to make the quiet farm feel, for one brief moment, less empty than it had in years. Nora did not laugh with him. Not fully. But as she went for the lantern, a small smile found her face in the dark, and she was grateful he could not see it. Because tomorrow morning was coming. And this time, she was not as certain she wanted him gone. By the third morning, Everett Hale had become a problem Nora Whitcomb could not place in any sensible category. He was not a hired hand, because she had not hired him. He was not a guest, because guests did not rise before sunrise and mend broken porch steps without being asked twice. He was not family, because Nora had no family left close enough to walk into her yard with a hammer and a quiet way of seeing what needed done. And he was not just passing through anymore, though both of them kept pretending he was. The farm woke under a thin pink sky. Mist lay over the lower pasture, and the sunflowers along the fence stood still as churchgoers. Nora stepped from the house carrying 2 tin cups of coffee, then stopped when she realized what she had done. 2 cups. She looked down at them with irritation, as if the coffee itself had betrayed her. For 3 years she had made 1 cup for one woman, 1 plate at breakfast, 1 lamp burning at night, 1 shadow moving across the kitchen walls. This morning, without thinking, she had poured coffee for Everett too. That was dangerous. She considered dumping it into the dirt. Then Everett came around the barn carrying an armful of kindling, his sleeves rolled to his elbows and dust already on his boots. He saw the cups in her hands, but was wise enough not to smile. "Morning," he said. Nora held 1 cup out. "I made too much." "Coffee has a way of doing that." "It was an accident." "I'll drink it carefully then." She gave him a narrow look, but he took the cup, and the morning somehow settled around the two of them as if it had been waiting for this arrangement. After breakfast, Nora went to the bean rows while Everett split wood by the shed. The sharp sound of the axe carried through the yard, steady, even, not too fast, not lazy. A man could reveal a lot by how he swung an axe. Some men swung like they were angry at the world. Some swung like they wanted to impress whoever watched. Everett swung like the wood simply needed splitting, and he had agreed to do it. Nora hated how much she respected that. She was halfway down the second row when Mrs. Lottie Bell arrived in a wagon pulled by a brown mule with 1 white ear. Lottie was 50, round-faced, sharp-eyed, and capable of turning a church picnic into a court hearing with 1 raised brow. She lived 2 farms over and had brought soup twice after Nora's husband died. She had also brought opinions almost every month since. "Nora Whitcomb," Lottie called, drawing the mule to a halt. "I heard a man was staying here." Nora closed her eyes for 1 brief second. Everett's axe paused near the shed. Nora stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Bell." Lottie climbed down from the wagon with a basket over 1 arm. Her eyes had already found Everett. "Well," she said, lowering her voice without making it any quieter, "so it's true." Everett set the axe down and tipped his hat. "Ma'am." Lottie looked him up and down the way. "A woman inspected peaches at market." "And who might you be?" "Everett Hale." "From where?" "Lately, Tennessee. Before that, several places." "That is not a comforting answer." "No, ma'am, but it's an honest one." Nora almost smiled, almost. Lottie turned to her. "Does the sheriff know there's a stranger sleeping in your barn?" "The sheriff has better things to do." "That is not what I asked." "He fixed my north fence, patched the barn roof, and kept Juniper from putting her head through the porch railing. If the sheriff objects to that, he may come split the wood himself." Lottie's eyes narrowed, but not with anger, more like interest. She looked again at Everett, then at the woodpile, then at the repaired porch step beneath her own boots. "Hello?" Nora knew that sound. It meant Lottie was arranging 12 future conversations in her mind. "I brought peach preserves," Lottie said, holding out the basket. Nora took it. "Thank you." "And a warning." "I didn't order one." "Warnings come free." Everett picked up the axe again, but Nora noticed he did not swing it. He was giving the women their space while hearing every word. Lottie stepped closer. Her voice softened a little. "You know I respect you. Lord knows there aren't many women who could hold this place together the way you have, but tongues in town move faster than wagons. A widow with a strange man on the property will give them a feast." Nora's face hardened. "Let them choke on it." "That sounds strong until the talk reaches the feed store, the church steps, and the bank." At the word bank, Nora's hand tightened on the basket. Everett saw it. Lottie saw Everett see it. The morning, which had been warm, seemed to cool. Nora lifted her chin. "There is nothing for the bank to hear." Lottie's face changed just slightly. Concern stepped through the cracks of gossip. "Nora," I said, "there's nothing." Lottie held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, though she did not look convinced. "Well," she said louder now, "I'll leave you to your work. Mr. Hale, do not steal anything, break anything, or make that woman cry." Everett gave a grave nod. "I'll do my best on all three." Lottie looked at him once more. "See that you do." When her wagon rolled away, dust trailed behind it in the morning light. Nora stood still until the sound faded. Everett waited longer than most men would have. Then he said, "Bank." Nora turned on him fast. "That is not your concern." "No." "Then don't ask." "I didn't ask much." "You asked enough." He set the axe down carefully and walked closer, stopping with plenty of space between them. "I'm not trying to pry." "People always say that right before prying." "I heard something that troubled you." "You hurt a neighbor with too much time." "I heard your hand tighten on that basket." Nora stared at him, caught between anger and the frightening knowledge that he had noticed something true. For a moment she looked tired, not the kind of tired sleep fixed, the kind that settled behind the eyes when a person had been standing alone too long and refused to sit down because standing was the only pride left. "The bank holds a note," she said at last. "Small one. It was taken the year before my husband died for seed and repairs after a bad flood. I have paid on it. I will keep paying on it. That is all." "When is it due?" "That is exactly the kind of question I am not answering." Everett nodded. "Fair enough." She expected him to push. Men usually pushed when they thought they had found a door. He did not. He only picked up the axe again and went back to splitting wood. Nora stood there, breath uneven, unsure what to do with a man who respected a boundary after touching it. By late afternoon, clouds gathered in the west. They rose slow and blew over the hills, carrying the smell of rain and wet leaves. Nora looked at them from the garden and began moving faster. "The hay," she called. Everett was already looking toward the field. A small cutting lay beyond the barn, dry enough to bring in if they moved quickly, lost if the storm reached them first. Nora hitched the mule while Everett readied the wagon. Neither spoke about the bank. Neither needed to speak about the sky. For the next 2 hours, they worked like the storm itself was chasing them. Nora loaded from one side, Everett from the other. Wind pressed her skirt against her legs and lifted loose strands of hair from beneath her hat. The first roll of thunder sounded beyond the ridge. The mule tossed its head. Everett stacked the hay tight and even, building the load higher while Nora forked more up to him. "You're packing it too high," she called. "It'll hold. If it falls, you pick it up alone. Then I'll make sure it holds." Rain touched the dust just as they reached the barn. Big drops, dark and sudden. Everett climbed up to throw down the hay while Nora dragged it toward the dry side, arms aching, breath short. The storm broke hard when the last bundle cleared the wagon. Rain hammered the roof he had patched the day before. Nora froze. No leak. The hay stayed dry. For reasons she could not explain, that nearly undid her. She turned away quickly and busied herself with the rope, but Everett had seen the shine in her eyes. He said nothing. Again, that silence was kindness. They stood in the barn doorway while rain poured over the yard. The world beyond the eaves blurred silver. The sunflowers bent under the weight of water but did not break. Nora held her arms around herself. "My husband's name was Samuel," she said suddenly. Everett looked at her, careful not to move too much. "He built that hayrack," she continued. "Badly. I told him so when he built it. He said beauty was less important than usefulness. Then one wheel came off the next week, and I told him usefulness might also be improved by beauty if beauty included proper bolts." Everett smiled faintly. Sounds like a fair argument. He laughed for 10 minutes. Her mouth softened at the memory, then trembled before she pressed it still. He died in January. Fever took him in 6 days. Afterward, everybody kept telling me what I needed: a brother to move in, a hired man, a new husband, someone to decide things, someone to carry things, someone to stand between me and the world. Rain ran from the barn roof in clear sheets. I got tired of folks looking at me like grief had made me half a person. Everett's voice was low when he answered, "Grief doesn't make a person half." Nora looked at him. "No," she said, "but it can make half the house go quiet." The words hung between them, plain and aching. Everett removed his hat, though they were already under shelter. "I'm sorry, Nora." She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. Somewhere in the yard, Juniper bleated from the safety of the goat shed, offended by weather she could not control. Nora let out a broken little breath that might have become a laugh if it had not started so close to tears. Everett looked toward the road, hidden now by rain. He thought of Colorado, of the cattle outfit, of the pay waiting if he arrived soon enough. He thought of the life he had built from leaving before anyone could ask him to stay. Then he looked at Nora, standing beside him in the dim barn with rainlight on her face, and 3 years of loneliness pressing through one small confession. For the first time, leaving did not feel free. It felt like turning his back on a door that had opened only an inch. If this moment touched your heart, stay with Nora and Everett a little longer, because some doors do not open twice. That evening, after the storm passed, Nora found the repaired roof dry, the hay safe, and Everett sitting on an overturned bucket near the barn doors, mending a broken strap on his saddle. The sight should have comforted her. Instead, it frightened her, because a man who kept his saddle ready still meant to ride. And Nora, who had sworn she needed no man and no new hurt, stood in the fading light with rain dripping from the eaves and realized she was starting to listen for his footsteps. The rain left the Whitcomb farm shining. By sunrise, every leaf held a bead of water. The yard smelled of wet earth, hay, and cedar smoke from Nora's kitchen stove. The patched barn roof looked darker where the rain had washed it clean, but not one drop had found its way through. Nora checked it twice before breakfast and told herself she was only inspecting the work. That was not fully true. She was also looking for Everett. She found him behind the barn, brushing down his gray horse with slow, careful strokes. The horse stood relaxed, one back hoof tipped, eyes half closed. Everett murmured something to him too low for Nora to hear. His saddle was on the rail. Not packed, not tied, not ready. A foolish relief moved through her before she could stop it. She turned to leave, but the horse lifted his head and gave a soft sound. Everett looked over. "Morning," he said. Nora folded her arms. "That horse tells on you. He has poor loyalty when breakfast is near." "What's his name?" Everett glanced at the gray as if surprised she had asked. "Ash." Nora looked at the horse's silver coat. "That suits him. He came with another name when I bought him. Didn't answer to it." "What was it?" "King." Nora gave the horse a doubtful look. Ash lowered his head and nuzzled Everett's shirt pocket. "He doesn't look like a king." No, he looked embarrassed by it. This time Nora did smile. It came and went quickly, but Everett saw it. He kept brushing the horse, pretending he had not, which made her grateful and irritated all at once. "There's work in the lower field today," she said. "Storm knocked down a section of corn." "I saw." "Of course you did. I can help stand it back up." She leaned against the barn door. "You said you were leaving at first light." "I did." "It's past first light." "It is." "You have a strange relationship with leaving, Mr. Hale." His hand stilled on the horse's neck. For a moment, something closed over his face like a curtain drawn across a window. "I suppose I do." Nora heard the weight in it. She had not expected that. She had meant to tease just a little, because teasing was easier than asking why he was still there, and harder than admitting she was glad. She looked away toward the lower field. "Well," she said softer, "corn won't lift itself." They worked the lower field until the sun climbed high. The storm had flattened more than Nora first thought. Whole rows leaned in a tangled green sweep where the wind had run hard across the valley. Some stalks were broken clean, but many could be saved if handled right. Nora moved with care, lifting and bracing, tying where needed. Everett followed her lead. He did not act like he knew better. He asked once, listened, and did it the way she showed him. That alone set him apart from half the men she had known. Most men came onto a widow's farm and tried to become the answer to every question before hearing the question. Everett worked like a man willing to be useful without taking over. By noon, Nora's sleeves clung to her arms and mud streaked the hem of her dress. Everett's hat was pushed low against the sun, his shirt dark with sweat. Ash watched from the fence line with the peaceful disinterest of a horse who had no intention of helping. When the dinner bell rang from the road, Nora straightened sharply. A wagon approached from town, drawn by 2 black horses. It was polished, covered, and too fine for a neighbor's errand. The man driving wore a dark coat despite the heat and a narrow hat that shaded a face Nora knew too well. Silas Greer. The banker. Everett noticed how Nora's shoulders changed before he saw the wagon clearly. She did not shrink. Nora Whitcomb did not shrink, but the air around her tightened. "Do you want me to go to the barn?" he asked quietly. "No," she said too fast. Then after one breath, "Stay where you are. Say nothing unless I ask." Everett nodded. Silas Greer stopped the wagon beside the gate as if he owned the road and was considering whether he might own the farm too. He climbed down slowly, dusted his sleeves, and looked over the fields with a small expression of concern that did not reach his eyes. "Nora," he called, "I hope to find you at home." "You found me working," she said. "So I see." His eyes moved to Everett. "And with company." Everett wiped mud from his hands with a cloth and said nothing. Nora walked to the fence but did not open the gate. "What brings you out here, Mr. Greer?" "Business, I'm afraid." "Business usually waits for town." "Not when town hears things before papers do." Nora's face did not change, but Everett saw her fingers curl against her skirt. Silas smiled faintly. "There are concerns." "Whose?" "The bank's." "The bank is a building. It has no concerns." "A fair wit does not change numbers, Nora." Everett looked from one to the other, still silent. Silas reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "Your note comes due in November." "I know. You have missed no payment, I'll give you that." "You don't give me what I earned." The banker's smile thinned. "Still, the amount remaining is not small. With another poor season, this farm may become a burden beyond your ability." "My season is not poor." "Storms are unpredictable, markets too. Tobacco prices shift, apple yields fail, labor costs rise." "I do my own labor." His eyes flicked again to Everett. "So I've heard." Nora's cheeks colored, but her voice stayed steady. "Say what you came to say." Silas stepped closer to the fence. "There is a buyer interested in taking over the debt and purchasing the property before the note becomes unpleasant." "The property is not for sale." "You haven't heard the offer." "I heard enough when you said buyer." "It would save you difficulty." "What difficulty?" "The kind a woman alone should not have to face." The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Everett's jaw tightened. Nora lifted her chin. A woman alone has faced plenty already. Silas glanced at Everett once more. Are you alone, Nora? The field went quiet. Even the insects seemed to pull back from the heat of that question. Everett took one slow step forward, then stopped. He had promised not to speak unless asked. Nora looked at the banker through the fence rails. What I am, she said, is the owner of this farm. For now. Everett's hand closed around the cloth he was holding. Silas refolded the paper. Think carefully. Pride is expensive. Land is more forgiving when handed over before the court gets involved. No court is involved. Not yet. He turned toward his wagon, then paused as if remembering something harmless. The interested buyer is Mr. Gideon Pike. Nora went still. Everett saw it. This was not just any name. Silas noticed too, and satisfaction brightened his face. He owns the mill road now, Silas said. He's acquiring several farms in the valley. He says he would let you remain through winter if you sign before harvest accounts are settled. Nora's voice came low. How generous. More generous than the law may be later. Everett could no longer keep quiet. That sounds like a threat. Silas looked at him as if noticing a hired dog had spoken. And you are. A man standing in a field. Then stand quietly. Nora turned her head. Everett. He stopped. Not because Silas deserved silence, but because Nora had asked for it. Silas climbed into his wagon. November comes whether we like it or not, Nora. I suggest you bring your ledger to town before the end of the week. I know my way to town. I'm sure you do. The wagon rolled away, its wheels cutting dark tracks through the damp road. Nora stayed by the fence until it disappeared beyond the bend. Everett waited. He was learning that Nora did not like being reached for, while pride was still holding her upright. At last she turned and walked back into the field. Corn, she said. Nora. Corn, she repeated sharper. So they worked. They lifted stalk after stalk beneath a white afternoon sun. Nora's hands moved quickly, almost fiercely. Everett kept pace, giving her silence until silence became too heavy. Who is Gideon Pike? He asked. Nora tied a corn stalk to a stake and pulled the knot hard. A man who thinks owning more land will make him taller. Everett waited. She sighed. He wanted to buy this place after Samuel died. Said a widow would only run it down. When I refused, he offered marriage instead. Everett's face hardened. Did you consider it? She looked at him then, eyes bright with anger. No. I didn't mean offense. Yes, you did, just not toward me. That was true enough that he did not deny it. Nora looked back at the corn. Gideon Pike does not want a wife. He wants property with a woman attached to it so folks can call greed respectability. The wind moved over the field. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered again, though no storm showed yet. Everett drove a stake into the ground. And the bank. I owe less than Greer makes it sound like, but less is still more than I have today. How much? She gave him a look. He held up one hand. Boundary, I know. For some reason, that gentleness nearly broke her more than Silas Greer's cruelty. Nora turned away, pretending to examine a damaged stalk. Her voice came quieter. $240 by November, maybe less if the apples sell high, maybe more if tobacco falls. Everett knew enough to understand. It was not an impossible amount for land, but for a widow running a farm alone, with weather and markets and bankers pressing at her back, it was a mountain. I have money, he said. No. You didn't hear how much. I heard enough. I could lend it. No. Nora. She faced him fully now. Do not take the one thing I have left and turn it into something I owe you for." The words struck him silent. Her chest rose and fell. Her eyes shone, but not with weakness, with fear, with the old wound of every person who had offered help with a hook hidden inside it. Everett removed his hat and looked down at it. "My father owed men his whole life," he said. Nora went still. "He worked cattle on land he never owned. Every year he said one more season and he'd have enough. Every year something broke, died, flooded, or came due. Men with clean coats would come out and talk to him like he was a boy. I learned young that owing can make a man bend in ways work never could." He looked at her. "I wasn't trying to put that on you." Nora's anger softened, but only around the edges. "Then don't." "I won't." They stood among the half-raised corn, the smell of wet soil thick around them. After a while, Nora nodded toward the row. "Hold that stalk straight." Everett did. They worked until evening. By supper, neither mentioned Sela's Greer or Gideon pike. Nora served beans, salt pork, and the peach preserves Lottie had brought. Everett praised the preserves without knowing he had stepped into dangerous territory, because Nora told him Lottie would become unbearable if she knew. "She already seems formidable," Everett said. "She's worse when encouraged. She told me not to make you cry." Nora stopped buttering bread. Everett regretted saying it at once. "I don't cry for men who come and go," she said. "No," he said softly. "I expect you save tears for things that stay." She looked at him across the table. There it was again. That way he had of seeing too much and saying it plain without pressing. It made her want to send him away. It made her want to ask him to remain until the room stopped feeling so wide. Outside, dusk settled over the farm. The sunflowers turned dark against the last amber light. When supper ended, Everett took his cup to the wash basin. Nora watched him from the table. "You can sleep in the small room tonight," she said. He turned. "It was Samuel's office," she added quickly. "There's a cot. The barn loft will be damp from the storm." Everett did not answer at once. Both of them understood the size of what she had offered. Not romance, not surrender, not trust fully. But a door opened another inch. "I'll be respectful of it," he said. "I know," Nora replied. The word surprised them both. Later that night, while Everett lay awake on the cot in the small room that still smelled faintly of paper, cedar, and old pipe smoke, Nora stood in the kitchen with a lamp in her hand, listening. For 3 years, the house had made only lonely sounds at night. Wood settling, wind at the window, her own footsteps. Now there was another breath under the roof. A quiet one, a temporary one. At least that was what she told herself. But on the table beside the cold stove lay the folded notice Sela's Greer had left at the gate. And beneath Nora's steady face, fear had begun to move like water under ice. Because if November took the farm from her, it would not matter whether Everett stayed or rode on. She would lose the only home she had left either way. The next morning, Nora found Everett standing in Samuel's old office with his hat in his hands, looking at the wall as if it had asked him a question. The room had not been used for much since her husband died. It was small, narrow, and plain, with one window looking toward the orchard and a desk pushed against the far wall. Samuel's ledgers still sat on the shelf, tied with string. His pipe was in the top drawer, though Nora had not opened that drawer in nearly a year. A faded map of the county hung crooked on the wall, the edges curling where summer damp had found it. Everett was looking at that map. Nora stood in the doorway with a cup of coffee in each hand. Again, 2 cups. This time she did not pretend it was an accident. "You study maps before breakfast?" she asked. He turned, "Only when they're crooked." "That map has been crooked since 1882. Then it's had a long run. She stepped in and handed him the coffee. He accepted it with a quiet nod. The office felt smaller with him in it, not because he filled it with noise. Everett did not fill places with noise. He filled them with noticing. That was worse in some ways. A noisy man could be ignored. A watchful one made silence feel alive. "You sleep?" Nora asked. "Some. That cot is narrow. I've slept on worse." "I believe that." He looked at her over the cup. "You." She almost said yes. It was the practical answer, the answer that closed the door. Instead, she looked at Samuel's desk and said, "Not much." Everett did not ask why. Perhaps he already knew. The bank notice lay folded in her apron pocket like a coal that had not cooled. She had carried it there after finding herself unable to leave it on the kitchen table. It seemed wrong for something so small to hold so much weight. A single paper, a few written lines, and suddenly every fence rail, every sunflower, every apple tree, every board in the porch had begun to look temporary. Nora hated that feeling more than fear itself. Fear she could work through. Temporary was harder. After breakfast, she hitched the mule to the wagon. Everett came out of the barn just as she tightened the traces. "Going to town?" "Yes." "To the bank." She pulled the leather strap harder than needed. "Feed store first." "And the bank after." Nora turned. "You ask questions like a man who expects answers." "No, like a man who's trying to understand where to stand." "That's easy here." He looked at the wagon, then toward the road. "You want me to stay at the farm. I want you to not make town worse by being beside me, while people already have too much to say." Everett took that without offense, which annoyed her. Offense would have made it simpler. "All right," he said. "I'll mend that weak gate hinge by the lower pasture." "I didn't say it needed mending." "It does." She stared at him. He added, "But I won't touch it unless you say." Nora let out a breath through her nose. "It needs mending." Everett nodded once. She climbed onto the wagon seat. The mule flicked an ear. For a moment, Nora looked down at Everett standing in the yard, his sleeves rolled, his expression steady, his presence already too natural against the shape of her mourning. "Don't let Juniper into the beans," she said. "I'll consider it my highest duty." She can open the east latch if she worries it long enough. "I'll watch her." And do not trust sentiment either. She looks slow, but she schemes. "I'll keep a sharp eye on all criminals." Nora almost smiled. Then she clicked her tongue to the mule and drove toward town. Willow Creek was not large, but it had all the things a town needed to keep people fed, judged, informed, and indebted. A feed store, a blacksmith, a church, a mercantile, a bank, and a row of men outside each doorway who believed standing still gave them permission to know everyone's business. By the time Nora reached the feed store, she felt eyes follow her wagon. She stepped down, ordered nails, flour, lamp oil, and 2 sacks of grain, then paid from the coin purse she kept tucked deep in her dress pocket. Mr. Prout behind the counter moved slower than usual, glancing once through the window toward the street. Nora knew the look. "What?" she asked. Mr. Prout coughed. "Nothing." "Then why are you wearing a nothing face?" He sighed and leaned on the counter. "Gideon Pike was in town early." "That is unfortunate for town." "He's been talking." "Also unfortunate." "Says he expects to own the Whitcomb place before Christmas." Nora's hand went still on the sack of nails. The store seemed to narrow around her. Mr. Prout lowered his voice. "I don't say it to trouble you. I say it because you ought to know what kind of talk he's spreading." Nora lifted her chin. "Gideon Pike has expected many things in his life. The good Lord has spared the rest of us from most of them." Mr. Prout's mouth twitched. "That's one way to put it." I need the grain loaded." "Yes, ma'am." Outside, while Mr. Prute's boy loaded the wagon, Nora saw Gideon Pike across the street near the bank. He was a tall man, thick through the chest, with a beard trimmed too carefully and boots too clean for a man who liked calling himself a farmer. He owned the Mill Road now, 2 small farms beyond the creek, and half the timber contract north of town. Folks spoke politely around him because money made cowards out of people who otherwise considered themselves honest. Gideon touched the brim of his hat when he saw Nora. She did not return the gesture. He crossed the street anyway. "Nora," he said, as if her name belonged in his mouth. "Mr. Pike. I heard Silas rode out yesterday." "Then your hearing works." His smile remained, but his eyes cooled. "No need for thorns. I came to make this easier." Strange how men keep trying to ease burdens I did not hand them. "You're proud, always have been." "I try to be accurate." He glanced at the wagon. "That farm is too much for one woman." "No, it is too much for the kind of man who thinks land works itself after he buys it." The boy loading grain froze with one sack half lifted. Gideon stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Careful, Nora. Sharp words don't pay notes." "No, apples do. Tobacco does, work does." "Markets can turn. So can wagons. Best you turn yours." His jaw tightened. "You think that drifter on your place will save you?" Nora's blood went cold, but she kept her face calm. "Everett Hale is not your concern." A strange man living under a widow's roof becomes everybody's concern. "He slept in my barn." "Did he?" The insult was not loud. That made it uglier. Nora's hand tightened so hard around the sack of nails that the paper edge bit her palm. Mr. Prute stepped out from the store. "Everything all right here?" Gideon's smile returned like a shutter closing. "Perfectly." Nora climbed onto the wagon seat. "Good day, Mr. Pike." "This road ends one way," Gideon said softly before she clicked to the mule. "You can sell with dignity or lose with shame." Nora looked down at him. "I buried shame with my husband's fever blanket," she said. "I have no use for it now." Then she drove away before he could see her hands shaking. She did not go to the bank. She meant to. She told herself she would turn at the next corner, tie the mule outside, walk in, and ask Silas Greer for the exact balance, the exact terms, the exact date he could make trouble if he chose. She had always believed in facing numbers straight. But by the time the bank doors came into view, her breath had gone tight. Through the window she saw Silas Greer speaking with Gideon Pike. Both men turned their heads as her wagon passed. Nora kept driving. The road home blurred under the noon sun. She hated herself for that, not for fear, but for letting fear decide direction. At the farm, Everett was crouched by the lower gate with a hinge pin in his hand. Juniper stood on the safe side of the fence, watching him with deep suspicion. Nora pulled the mule to stop harder than needed. Everett stood. "Town go poorly." She climbed down. "Town went like town." "That bad?" "I don't want to talk about it." "All right." He took the grain sacks from the wagon and carried them to the barn. Nora followed with the smaller parcels, angry at the way he did not pry, angry at the way that made her want to tell him everything. When the wagon was unloaded, he noticed the torn paper sack in her hand and the thin red line across her palm. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." "It's something." "I said it's nothing." Everett stopped. "Nora." Something in his voice broke the last of her control, not because it was harsh, because it was gentle. She turned on him. "He said you were living under my roof like I'd done something shameful by letting a tired man sleep where rain couldn't reach him. He said he'll own this place by Christmas. He said I can sell with dignity or lose with shame. and Sela's was standing with him inside the bank like they had already counted my apples before they fell from the tree. Her voice shook on the last words, and she hated that most of all. Everett set the grain sack down slowly. For a moment there was something dangerous in his face, not wild, not reckless, controlled anger held tight because he knew it was not his to spend carelessly. "What do you need?" he asked. The question stopped her. Not "what should I do?" Not "let me fix it." Not "where is he?" "What do you need?" Nora looked at him, and the answer rose before pride could bury it. "I need to not feel cornered in my own home." Everett nodded. "Then we start with the numbers." "I didn't go to the bank." "I gathered." "I couldn't." "That's all right." "No, it is not." "Yes, it is." His voice stayed steady. "Not going today doesn't mean not going ever." She looked away, breathing hard. Everett stepped toward the barn, then stopped. Samuel kept ledgers. Nora's eyes moved to the house. "Yes." "Do you keep them now?" "Yes." "Then we can look at what you have, what will sell, what might bring more, what can wait. You don't have to decide everything with Pike's voice still in your ears." Nora stood in the yard with the afternoon sun on her face and the farm all around her. The sunflower heads nodded in the breeze. The repaired fence held. The patched roof held. The gate hinge, though not yet finished, waited with its pin cleaned and ready. Small things held. Maybe she could too. "You know figures?" she asked. Enough to know when a man in a clean coat is trying to make a debt sound bigger than it is. She almost laughed, but it came out tired. That evening, they sat at Samuel's desk with the ledgers open between them. Nora had not sat there with another person since before the fever. The chair creaked under Everett's weight. The lamp flame moved when the window breathed. Outside, the farm settled into night, and the frogs began their calling by the creek. Line by line, they went through what she owed and what she had. Apples not yet harvested. Corn partly damaged but not ruined. Tobacco likely enough if the price held. Egg money. Preserves. A few tools she refused to sell. One milk cow she refused even harder. Everett did not argue when she said no. He marked possibilities, not commands. After an hour he sat back. "It's close," he said. "How close?" "Close enough to scare a banker who wants you frightened before harvest." Nora stared at the numbers. "So I'm not ruined?" "No. But I'm not safe." "Not yet." The honesty should have hurt. Instead, it steadied her. She touched one finger to Samuel's old handwriting at the top of the page. Then she looked at her own figures beneath it, smaller but careful, every payment recorded, every sale noted. "I thought keeping this place meant never needing anyone," she said quietly. Everett looked at her across the lamplight. "Maybe keeping it means knowing who can stand beside you without trying to own the ground under your feet." Nora did not answer. She could not. Because that was the nearest anyone had come to naming what she had been afraid of. If you believe a woman's strength should not mean carrying every burden alone, stay with this story. Sometimes the heart changes not through grand words, but through one person sitting beside you when the numbers look dark. Later, after the ledger closed, Nora went to the porch. The night was warm. Stars hung over the valley. Everett came out a few minutes later but stayed near the door, giving her space. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll go to the bank. I can ride with you." She looked over. He waited for the refusal. Nora looked toward the road, then at the sunflowers standing like sentries beside the fence. "No," she said at last, "not with me." Everett's face gave nothing away, but his hand shifted on his hat. "Behind me," she said, "far enough that town knows I went in by myself, close enough that I remember I don't have to ride home alone." Everett nodded, and something quiet passed between them in the dark. Not a promise. Not yet. But close enough to make sleep difficult. And in the small office, beneath the crooked county map, the open ledger waited like a battlefield drawn in ink. Nora slept little that night. The numbers from Samuel's old ledger followed her into every corner of the dark. $240 by November. Apples still hanging. Tobacco still uncertain. Corn damaged but not gone. A bank that wanted her frightened. A rich man who wanted her land. A drifter in the small room whose quiet breathing made the house feel less empty and more dangerous all at once. Before dawn, she rose and dressed by lamplight. She chose her plain blue dress, the one with a clean collar and strong seams. Not her best dress. She was not going to the bank to plead or perform. She braided her hair tighter than usual, pinned it at the back, and tied her boots with hands that only shook once. In the kitchen, she found Everett already awake. He stood by the stove, pouring coffee into 2 cups. His hair was damp from the pump, and his hat lay on the table beside him. For a strange moment, the sight looked so ordinary that Nora's chest tightened. "You're early," she said. "So are you." "I have reason. I figured you might want coffee before facing town." She walked to the table and took the cup. Their fingers did not touch this time, but she felt the nearness anyway. "I'm going in alone," she reminded him. "I know. You'll stay back." "I will. And if Gideon says something ugly, you will not answer unless I ask you to." Everett looked at her over his cup. "I'll do my best." "That is not comforting." "It's honest." She studied him. "You have a temper under all that quiet." "Yes. At men like him. At men who use fear like a fence." Nora looked down into her coffee. The steam rose between them, thin and pale. "My husband Samuel had a temper too," she said. "But it came and went like summer thunder. Loud, quick, done. Yours feels like it waits." Everett was quiet for a moment. "Waiting has kept me out of trouble more than once." "And gotten you into any." His eyes moved toward the window, where dawn had begun turning the yard gray. "Yes." She wanted to ask more. She did not. The day already held enough sharp edges. They hitched the mule just as the sun broke over the hills. Nora drove the wagon. Everett rode Ash behind her, far enough back that it could not be called an escort by anyone who wanted a scandal, close enough that she heard the soft rhythm of the horse's hooves when the road grew too quiet. Willow Creek was waking when they arrived. Smoke rose from chimneys. The blacksmith had already opened his doors. A boy swept dust from the mercantile porch with more energy than skill. Men outside the feed store turned their heads when Nora drove past. One of them looked over her shoulder and saw Everett riding behind. The talk would start before noon. Let it, Nora thought. She tied the mule in front of the bank and climbed down. Her knees felt unsteady, but she made them work. She smoothed the front of her dress, lifted her chin, and walked inside. The bank smelled of paper, ink, and polished wood. Silas Greer stood behind the counter with his silver watch chain shining across his vest. He looked up as if surprised to see her, though Nora knew he was not surprised at all. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "I was hoping you'd come. I came for the exact balance on my note." His eyes flicked toward the window. Everett remained outside across the street, standing beside Ash near the trough, exactly where Nora had asked him to stay. Silas smiled. "You brought your friend." "I brought myself." "Of course. I want the balance, the payment date, and a written statement of both." Silas tapped one finger on the counter. "That is rather formal." "A bank is a formal place." "Indeed." He moved slowly, taking down a ledger, turning pages with long fingers. Nora watched every motion. She had done business with him before, but never had she noticed how much he enjoyed making people wait. At last he said, $240 plus the remaining interest through November 1st. How much interest? $11.60 if paid on the 1st. Nora swallowed. $251.60. The mountain had grown. And if I pay before then? It would reduce slightly. How slightly? Silas looked up. That depends on date of payment. I want that written down. His smile thinned. Mrs. Whitcomb, I do wonder if perhaps you're taking a hard road when a kinder one has been offered. I asked for numbers, not roads. Mr. Pike's offer would settle everything. You could stay on through winter, perhaps longer if you came to suitable terms. Nora's hands rested on the counter. She kept them flat so he would not see them curl. What terms? Silas raised his brows. That would be between you and Mr. Pike. Then keep it between me and Mr. Pike by not speaking of it. A clerk at the back desk looked up, then quickly looked down again. Silas closed the ledger halfway. Careful, Nora. There it was, her given name in a place where respect should have required more. She leaned in slightly. Mr. Greer, my husband is dead, not my hearing. I know when I am being warned. Silas's face hardened. Then hear this plainly. If the note is not paid by November 1st, the bank will pursue collection as the law allows. Write that down too. He stared at her. She stared back. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and a wagon passing outside. Finally, Silas took out a sheet of paper. He wrote the balance, the interest, the due date, and the consequences in a neat hand. Nora watched the pen closely. When he finished, he sanded the ink, shook the paper, and handed it to her. She read it twice. Sign it, she said. His mouth tightened. That is unnecessary. It is to me. He signed. Nora folded the paper and placed it in her reticule. Good day. She turned and walked out without asking permission from the floor to hold her. Outside, the sunlight struck hard and clean. For a second, she could not breathe. Then she saw Everett across the street, still beside Ash, one hand resting on the horse's neck. He did not rush to her. He waited. That nearly broke her more than if he had come running. She crossed the street. Well, he asked. $251.60 by November 1st. Everett's eyes narrowed slightly. He added interest. He added confidence. That too. Nora let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. I got it in writing. Good. I made him sign. This time Everett's face did change. Pride, plain and quiet, warmed his eyes. I wish I'd seen that part. You would have smiled. I am smiling. She looked at him and realized he was, just a little. Before she could answer, Gideon Pike stepped from the mercantile across the road. He had been waiting. Nora knew it at once. Men like Gideon did not appear by accident when there was power to enjoy. Nora, he called, did Silas explain matters clearly? Everett's shoulders went still. Nora turned, very clearly. Gideon crossed toward them. People along the street began pretending not to watch. That's good. A woman ought to know when the ground under her is shifting. My ground is steady. For now. Everett took one step closer to Ash's head, holding the reins but said nothing. Gideon's eyes moved to him. Still here, Drifter. Everett answered calmly, still here. Funny thing about men who don't own land. They often have strong opinions about land that isn't theirs. Funny thing about men who keep buying land, Everett said, voice low. They often forget it still has people standing on it. Nora shot him a warning glance. Gideon smiled. Careful. I don't know you, Mr. Hale, but I can make a guess. Men drifting town to town usually leave because staying somewhere made trouble. Everett's face closed. The remark had struck something. Nora saw it, and so did Gideon. Maybe Tennessee, Gideon continued. Maybe farther east. A man doesn't ride alone for no reason. Everett's hand tightened around Ash's reins. Nora stepped forward before he could answer. You will not stand in the street and pick at a man's past because your own present is too small to hold your pride. A murmur moved from the feed store porch. Gideon's smile faded. You always did have a sharp tongue. And you always did confuse silence with agreement. His eyes chilled. November 1st, Nora, that is not so far away. No, she said, it is. Gideon tipped his hat with mock courtesy and walked away. Only when he was gone did Everett move. He turned slightly away from the street, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the dust. Nora watched him. What did he mean? She asked softly. Everett did not look at her. Nothing useful. That is not an answer. No. Everett. He looked at her then, and for the first time since she had met him, his steadiness looked strained. I once stayed somewhere long enough to believe it might be mine, he said. It was. She waited. His voice was quiet. There was a ranch in Tennessee. Man named Roland Sutter owned it. I worked horses for him 2 years. He promised me a partnership if I helped build the stock. I believed him. Put my savings into feed, breeding, repairs. When the horses started bringing money, he claimed every animal, every board, every dollar belonged to him. Had papers drawn up pretty enough to make theft look respectable. Nora felt a cold anger rise in her. What did you do? Argued loudly. And Everett's eyes went past her toward the far end of town. There was a fight. No one died. No one was ruined but me. But Sutter had friends with badges and I had a name easy to dirty, so I left before his lies could become law. Nora understood then why Gideon's words had found their mark. Men with papers, men with clean coats, men who could turn truth into something smaller if they had enough ink. I'm sorry, she said. Everett gave a faint, humorless smile. That's not a story I tell at breakfast. No, but it's one I'm glad to know. His eyes came back to hers. The street moved around them. Wagon wheels, store bells, men pretending not to listen. Yet for one quiet breath, Willow Creek seemed to fall away. Nora reached for the wagon rail, steadying herself. We should go, she said. Yes. They rode home in silence, but it was not the silence of strangers. Back at the farm, Nora placed Silas Greer's signed paper inside Samuel's ledger and tied the ledger shut with a blue ribbon. She looked at it for a long moment, then turned to Everett. We harvest everything we can, she said. We sell smart, we waste nothing, we give Gideon Pike no pleasure. Everett nodded. That's a good plan. I also need the East Smokehouse cleaned before apple drying starts. I'll do it. And the wagon wheel checked. I saw the wobble. Of course you did. And the orchard ladder has a cracked rung. Nora pointed at him. That one I saw first. He almost smiled. I believe you. The days that followed became a season of work. They rose before dawn and moved until their shadows grew long. Everett repaired what truly needed repairing, and Nora made him leave alone what could wait. They brought in corn that had survived the storm. They turned bruised fruit into preserves. They sorted tobacco leaves with care. They cleaned jars, sharpened tools, mended baskets, and wrote figures by lamplight each night, until the debt stopped looking like a monster and began looking like a hard road with an end. And somewhere in all that work, the farm began to sound different. Everett's boots on the porch in the morning. Nora's voice calling from the garden. Ash snickering near the barn. The goats complaining as if they had been denied legal rights. The coffee pot filling 2 cups. One evening, near the end of August, Nora found Everett in the orchard standing beneath an old apple tree, holding a broken branch in his hands. That one was Samuel's favorite, she said. Everett looked up. I'm sorry, storm must have cracked it. It happens. But her voice had gone thin. He lowered the branch carefully. Can it be saved? The tree can, that branch no. She stepped closer and touched the bark. The leaves were still green, still trying. Samuel planted this row the spring after we married. Said he wanted something that would outlive both of us. Everett stood beside her, quiet. He thought that was romantic, Nora said. I told him it was a bold thing to say to a woman holding pruning shears. Everett laughed softly. Nora did too, just once. Then the laugh faded. I was angry at him for dying, she said, surprising herself with the words. Isn't that a cruel thing? No. She looked at him. No, he said again, it's a human thing. The orchard held the evening around them. Bees moved slowly in the lavender along the path. The sky burned orange beyond the ridge. I spent 3 years proving I could stay standing, Nora said. I didn't notice how tired I was until you came and stood there too. Everett's eyes softened, but he did not reach for her. I don't want to be another thing you have to survive, he said. The words entered her quietly and stayed. Before she could answer, a wagon rattled on the road. Lottie Bell's voice carried from the gate. Nora, I brought empty jars, and I am choosing not to ask why Mr. Hale is looking at you like that. Nora stepped back so quickly, she nearly tripped over a root. Everett looked down, hiding a smile. Nora turned toward the gate, face warm. Mrs. Bell, if you came to help, help. If you came to narrate, go home. Lottie laughed loud enough to startle the goats. If this story is keeping you company tonight, tell me in the comments. Can 2 broken people build something strong without calling it love too soon? That night after Lottie left and the jars were stacked in the pantry, Nora stood at the sink washing the last dish. Everett dried beside her. It had happened without discussion. Wash hand over, dry, stack. A simple rhythm, but it felt more intimate than any compliment. When the last plate was put away, Everett reached for his hat. I'll check the barn before sleep. Nora nodded. He stepped toward the door. Everett, she said. He turned. She held the dish towel in both hands. When you leave, don't do it before sunrise. His face changed. She looked down quickly. I dislike finding out things after they've happened. Everett stood very still. I won't, he said. She nodded once, as if that settled a practical matter. But after he left, Nora pressed one hand to the edge of the sink and closed her eyes. Because she had not asked him to stay. Not exactly. But for the first time, she had admitted that his leaving would be something she needed to prepare for. And outside, under the stars, Everett Hale stood beside the barn with his hat in his hand, knowing the road to Colorado still existed, still waited, still had a place for him. Only now, the thought of taking it felt less like freedom and more like loss. September came to Willow Creek with gold in its hands. The mornings turned cooler first. Not cold, not yet, but cool enough that Nora started wearing Samuel's old brown shawl when she stepped onto the porch before sunrise. The fields changed by slow degrees. The corn dried pale at the edges. The tobacco leaves hung in the curing shed with their deep green fading toward brown. The orchard began to smell different, sharper and sweeter, like the apples had spent all summer gathering sunlight and were finally ready to give it back. Nora had always loved harvest. She loved the honest tiredness of it, the way a basket filled because hands had done the filling, The way numbers in a ledger could become less frightening when the barn shelves grew fuller. Harvest did not flatter. It did not pity. It gave according to weather, work, and mercy. But that year, harvest carried a second sound beneath it. A cluck. November 1st waited at the edge of every morning. $251.60. Nora saw the number when she counted apples. She heard it when jars sealed with a soft pop in the pantry. She felt it in her shoulders when she lifted baskets too heavy and refused to complain. Everett saw it too. He did not say the number unless they were at the ledger. He had learned that speaking fear aloud all day did not make it smaller. Instead, he worked with her in the orchard, in the shed, in the garden, and around the wagon. He lifted the high branches. She sorted by size and quality. He carried full baskets to the barn. She marked each crate with careful chalk. When the mule balked, he coaxed her. When the goats caused trouble, Nora scolded them with the tired authority of a judge. When Ash tried to steal an apple from a low basket, Everett looked personally betrayed. "Your horse is a thief," Nora said. "He has weakness for fine produce. He has weakness for anything not nailed down." Everett looked at Ash, who was chewing with deep satisfaction. That may also be true. It should have been a small thing. A man, a horse, an apple. But Nora found herself laughing, and the sound moved through the orchard before she could pull it back. Everett looked at her. Not long, not boldly. Just enough. Nora turned to the basket quickly. "Don't stare. It was not that funny." It was a little funny. It was theft. Cheerful theft. There is no such thing. Ash disagrees. Nora shook her head, but the smile stayed longer than she intended. By the second week of September, the apple harvest came in heavy. The old trees bent low with fruit. Some branches had to be propped to keep them from cracking. Lottie Bell came twice with jars and stayed long enough to help peel apples while asking questions she pretended were not questions. Mr. Prout arranged for 3 crates to go with a merchant wagon headed toward Little Rock, where apples fetched a better price. Even the blacksmith's wife ordered preserves early, saying folks were starting to talk about Nora's spiced apple butter like it had healing powers. For the first time in weeks, the ledger began to look less cruel. One evening, after a long day in the orchard, Nora and Everett sat at Samuel's desk. The lamp burned steady. The window was open to the night. Crickets sang outside in the grass, and somewhere near the barn, Juniper gave one unhappy bleat, likely because life had denied her something she had no right to want. Nora dipped the pen and wrote the day's total. Then she stared. Everett leaned closer. "What is it?" She did the addition again, slower. "We are close," she said. "How close?" "If the tobacco sells at fair price, and the rest of the apples hold, close enough." Everett looked at the page, then at her. Nora's face did not break into joy. She was too careful for that. But something changed in her eyes. A small light came in, cautious and trembling like a lamp carried through wind. "Close enough," she repeated. Everett sat back and let out a breath. For a moment, neither moved. Then Nora pressed her fingers against the edge of the ledger and whispered. Samuel would have checked that number 3 times and still not believed it. Everett smiled softly. "Then we can check it 4. She looked at him, and the room grew quiet in a different way. There were moments now when silence no longer stood between them like a wall. It sat beside them, gentle and full. This was one of those moments. The lamplight touched the side of Everett's face. He looked tired but not restless. Nora realized she had not seen him touch his packed saddle in days. The thought warmed her. Then it frightened her. Because hope, once it entered, wanted more room than fear. She closed the ledger. "We should sleep. Dawn will come whether we invite it or not." Everett nodded. "It usually does." He reached for the lamp, then stopped. Nora. She looked back. When this note is paid, what will you do first? The question startled her. She had thought so much about paying the note that she had not allowed herself to imagine anything beyond it. I don't know, she said. Nothing. Nothing. He nodded. A day of nothing. That sounds wasteful. It sounds earned. Nora considered that with suspicion. What does a person do on a day of nothing? Sit. For a whole day. Part of it. And the rest. Maybe walk the creek. Eat something you didn't cook while thinking about 6 other tasks. Watch the sunflowers without judging their posture. Nora gave him a dry look. Their posture often deserves judgment. Everett's mouth curved. She looked down at the ledger, then back at him. What would you do? His smile faded a little. Me. When the note is paid, what would you do first? He was quiet too long. Nora felt the room shift. At last he said, I suppose I would decide where I'm going. The answer landed softly, but it landed. Nora looked away. Of course. He had never promised anything beyond help. He had never said he would stay after the harvest, after the note, after the danger passed. That was the cruel trick her own heart had played. It had turned his daily presence into something permanent without asking his permission. Everett saw her close. He saw it in her shoulders, in the way her hand moved to the ledger ribbon, in the stillness of her face. I didn't mean it like that, he said. How did you mean it? I mean, I've been putting the question off. That is not better. No, he admitted, it may not be. Nora stood. You don't owe me an answer. Nora. You don't. I asked the question, you answered it, that is all. But it was not all. They both knew it. She went to the kitchen, busying herself with cups that did not need washing and a stove that did not need tending. Everett remained in the office a moment longer, staring at the closed ledger as if the numbers had turned into something more difficult than debt. That night the house felt wide again. Nora lay awake under her quilt and listened to the old sounds. Wind against the window, wood settling, a horse shifting in the barn. From the small office came no sound at all, though she knew Everett was awake too. In the morning they spoke politely. Too politely. The kind of politeness that made every word stand careful and far apart. Nora went to the orchard alone after breakfast. Everett let her. He mended crate slats by the barn, his hands moving through the work while his mind stayed elsewhere. By mid-morning, Lottie Bell arrived with a basket of clean cloths, and one look at Nora's face told her more than Nora wanted known. You two have had a silence, Lottie said. Nora pulled an apple from a branch. People have silence all the time. Not like this one has boots. I am not discussing Everett Hale. I didn't name him. You meant him. I mean many things. I am a woman of depth. Nora gave her a look. Lottie picked up a basket and began sorting apples. For once, her voice softened without losing its strength. Careful, Nora. If this is another warning about town talk, save it. It is. Then what? Lottie looked toward the barn, where Everett was stacking repaired crates. Some men leave because they don't care enough to stay, she said. Some leave because caring gives them too much to lose. Nora's hand stilled around an apple. Lottie continued, that man looks to me like the second kind. Nora placed the apple in the basket. You know that from watching him fix crates. I know it from watching him watch you when you aren't looking. Heat rose into Nora's face. Mrs. Bell. I am old enough to say what I please. You are 50. Old enough. Nora turned back to the tree. He has a road waiting. We all do. The question is whether the road is calling or whether we just fear the house." Nora did not answer. Lottie let the words sit, then changed the subject so suddenly Nora nearly thanked her. By afternoon, a wagon arrived from town. Not Lottie's, not Mr. Pruitt's. A dark wagon with polished wheels. Gideon Pike sat at the reins. Nora was in the orchard when she saw him stop at the gate. Everett saw him from the barn at the same time. Both began moving, but Nora lifted one hand sharply. "Stay." Everett stopped, though it cost him. Nora walked to the gate alone. Gideon climbed down, holding his hat with an air of false courtesy. "Nora," he said, "you've been hard to catch." "I've been working." "So I see." His eyes moved over the crates stacked near the barn, the baskets beneath the trees, the signs of a harvest better than he had hoped for. That displeased him. "You came to admire apples?" Nora asked. "I came with an offer. I already refused it. This one is improved." "Then it has become more unnecessary." His jaw tightened. "You are making a mistake." "I make many, this is not one." Gideon stepped closer to the gate. "You think a few good crates will save you, but apples bruise, wagons break, buyers change their minds, banks lose patience. Is that a farmer talking or a man hoping? Do not mock me. Then stop making it easy." His face darkened. Behind Nora, Everett took one step forward, then stopped again. Gideon lowered his voice. "You have forgotten what you are, Nora. A widow with debt is not a queen on a throne. You are a woman standing in a house the bank can take." Nora's fingers closed around the gate latch. There was fear in her, yes. He knew it. He had always known how to look for fear and press his thumb there. But there was something else, too. A summer of fences repaired. A ledger balanced by lamplight. Coffee poured into 2 cups. A man behind her who would step forward if she asked, and remain still if she needed. Nora lifted her chin. "And you have forgotten what land is, Gideon. It is not paper. It is not gossip. It is not something you win by making a woman afraid. Land knows who tends it. Mine knows me." For the first time, Gideon Pike looked truly angry. "You'll regret speaking to me like that." "No," Nora said, "I have regretted silence more." A wagon rattled behind him on the road. Mr. Pruitt slowed as he passed, saw Gideon at Nora's gate and kept his eyes sharp. Gideon noticed. Public cruelty did not suit him unless he could dress it up. He put his hat back on. "November 1st, he said. "I remember dates." He climbed into his wagon and snapped the reins harder than needed. When he was gone, Nora stood at the gate a moment longer, her knees weaker than she wanted them to be. Everett came up behind her, stopping a few feet away. "You all right?" "No." The honesty surprised them both. Everett's voice softened. "What do you need?" Nora turned around. There were 100 answers she could have given. Water, quiet, the ledger, another hour of work, a world where men like Gideon Pike did not mistake greed for destiny. Instead, she looked at Everett Hale, at the man who had ridden into her life because a sunflower leaned and a fence cracked, and she said the one thing pride had been standing in front of for weeks. "I need you not to speak of leaving tonight." Everett's face changed. Nora swallowed. "Tomorrow if you must, but not tonight." He took one slow breath. "All right," he said, "not tonight." That evening, they worked side by side in the orchard until the sky turned red and the shadows stretched long through the trees. No one mentioned roads. No one mentioned Colorado. No one mentioned what waited after the note was paid. After supper, Nora stepped onto the porch. Everett followed a few minutes later and stood beside the railing, close enough that his sleeve nearly touched hers. The sunflowers were dark shapes now, bowed under the weight of their own seeds. "They'll need cutting soon," Everett said. "I know. I figured." She looked at him, and this time the small smile came without warning. "You do say that a lot." "I do." The quiet settled warm between them. Then Nora reached out, not fully thinking, and placed her hand over his where it rested on the rail. Everett went still. Her hand was rough from work, small against his but steady. She did not look at him. He did not move. For a long moment, the whole farm seemed to hold its breath. The barn, the orchard, the road, the darkening hills, all of it waiting to see whether one of them would speak and ruin the courage of silence. Everett turned his hand slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their fingers closed together on the porch rail. No promise was made. No confession was spoken. But in that quiet handclasp, beneath an Arkansas sky turning full of stars, Nora Whitcomb admitted what her words were not yet brave enough to say. She did not want him gone. And Everett Hale, who had spent half his life leaving before anyone could ask him to stay, felt the road behind him grow dim. The next morning, Nora woke to the sound of an empty yard. It was not truly empty. The rooster had begun his uneven calling. The goats were complaining near the pen with their usual sense of injustice. A wagon board creaked in the cool air, and somewhere beyond the barn, Ash gave a soft snort. But she did not hear Everett. No low murmur to his horse, no boots on the porch, no pump handle groaning under his hand, no steady movement in the barnyard before the day had fully opened its eyes. For one breath, old fear rose so fast it stole the strength from her fingers. He had left. The thought came cruel and complete. She sat up in bed, heart beating hard, listening again. Nothing, only the farm making morning without him. Nora dressed quickly, not bothering with her hair beyond a loose braid. She stepped into the kitchen, found the stove cold, the second cup still on the shelf, and hated herself for looking at it. She went to the back door. The barn doors were open. Ash stood in his stall. Everett's saddle was gone from the rail. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. Then a voice came from the lower field. "Juniper, if you value your reputation, you'll step away from that fence." Nora closed her eyes. The relief was so sharp it almost made her angry. She found Everett beyond the garden, kneeling by the lower fence with his saddle blanket spread beside him. His saddle was there too, turned upside down, one stirrup leather loosened. Juniper stood on the other side of the fence, watching him with the expression of a creature who had been wrongly accused despite clear evidence. Everett looked up when Nora approached. "You thought I left," he said. She stopped. "I did not say that." "You didn't have to." "I heard no one in the yard." "I came down early. Saddle strap was worn worse than I liked. Didn't want it giving out on the road someday." The road. There it was again, waiting in the sentence like a shadow. Nora folded her arms against the morning chill. Someday. Everett looked at the strap in his hands. Bad choice of word. No honest one. He said nothing. The lower field lay behind him, pale with dew. The sun had not yet reached the hilltops. In that gray-gold light, Everett looked both present and already half gone, a man sitting on land that did not belong to him, holding leather meant for travel. Nora wished she had stayed in the house. Everett set the strap aside. "I told you I wouldn't leave before sunrise." "And you kept that." "I meant more than sunrise." She looked at him then. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. "I meant I wouldn't leave without telling you." "That is not the same as staying." "No," he said, "it is." The truth sat between them, plain and unwelcome. Nora looked toward the orchard because it was easier than looking at him. The apple trees were heavy now, red and gold fruit catching the first light. There was work enough to bury a heart under if a person moved quickly. "We need to finish the north row today," she said. Everett nodded. "I'll get the ladders." The day became all hands and baskets. They worked with a careful distance between them. Not cold, not unkind, but cautious. Nora took the lower branches and sorted the fruit into crates. Everett worked the ladder, picking from the high limbs and lowering full baskets with a rope. The orchard smelled of apples, damp grass, and the faint lavender Nora had planted along the path years ago when Samuel said every useful place deserved one unnecessary beauty. That memory came at her without warning. She looked at the lavender, then away. Everett saw but did not ask. By mid-morning, Lottie Bell arrived with a covered basket and a sharp eye. She took one look at Nora, one look at Everett, and wisely began peeling apples without commentary. That was unusual enough to make Nora suspicious. "What?" Nora asked. Lottie lifted both brows. "I said nothing." "You are loudest when saying nothing." "That is because I am gifted." Everett coughed into his sleeve, not quite hiding a laugh. Nora pointed a paring knife at him. "You are not invited into this." "Yes, ma'am." "And do not call me ma'am." "Yes, Nora." Lottie smiled into her basket. For a little while, the work softened them. Apples dropped into baskets with solid thumps. Lottie told a story about Mr. Bell trying to fix a churn and making butter fly across the pantry wall. Everett laughed, and Nora found herself smiling despite the tightness still living under her ribs. Then a boy came running up the road from town. It was Mr. Pruitt's youngest, a narrow child with dust on his knees and panic in his eyes. He stopped at the gate, breathing hard. "Mrs. Whitcomb." Nora set down her basket. "What is it, Jonah?" "Pa sent me. He said to tell you the little rock wagon broke an axle near Mill Bend. The merchant's turning back. He won't take your apple crates tomorrow." For a moment, Nora did not understand the words. Then she did. The little rock wagon was the best price. 3 crates already promised, maybe 5 if the fruit held. Without that sale, the ledger would not stretch far enough unless tobacco brought more than fair value, and fair value had never been something poor farmers could command from comfortable buyers. Lottie stopped peeling. Everett stepped down from the ladder. Nora wiped her hands on her apron slowly. "Did your pa say when another wagon goes?" "Not for 2 weeks, maybe more." 2 weeks was too late. Apples bruised. Good fruit became common fruit. Common fruit became cider if luck held and pig feed if it did not. Gideon Pike's voice moved through her mind. Apples bruise, wagons break, buyers change their minds. Nora looked toward the road, sudden cold moving through her. Everett saw the same thought enter her face. "Did the axle break," he asked Jonah, "or was it helped?" The boy swallowed. "I don't know, sir. Pa just said to come quick." Nora turned sharply. "Don't put that in his head." "It was already in yours." "That does not make it true." "No," Everett said, "but it makes it worth asking." Lottie stood, brushing apple peel from her apron. "Gideon Pike owns the mill road." Nora looked at her. Lottie's mouth tightened. "I am not saying he broke the wagon. I am saying that if trouble happens on land a greedy man owns, I do not call it weather." The orchard went quiet. Nora looked at the crates stacked beneath the trees. All that work, all that hope counted in chalk marks and careful rows. Her throat tightened, but she refused the tears. Gideon would not get tears from her, not even in private if she could help it. Everett looked from the crates to the road, then to ash in the barn pasture. "I can take them," he said. Nora turned. "Take what?" "The crates, not all but the best 3, maybe 4 if we balance the wagon right. I can drive them to Mill Bend and meet the merchant before he turns too far back. If his axle is fixed, he buys. If not, I ride on to the river landing and find another buyer. The river landing is a day out. Less if I push. No. Everett's eyes held steady. Nora. No, you will not take my wagon and chase buyers over bad roads because Gideon Pike may or may not have frightened a merchant. We need the sale. We. The word came out sharper than she meant. Everett went still. Nora regretted it immediately, but pride had already drawn blood and did not know how to stop. Everett looked at her for a long moment. You need the sale, he said quietly. The hurt in his voice was small, carefully hidden, and worse than anger. Nora's fingers tightened around her apron. I did not mean it that way. Yes, you did, but maybe not the way it sounded. Lottie looked between them, and suddenly found great interest in the apple basket. Everett took his hat from the low branch where it hung. I'll go if you say yes. I'll stay if you say no. But the apples won't wait while we protect our pride. Nora looked at the crates. Every choice felt like surrender. If she sent him, she had to trust him with the wagon, the apples, the sale, and the return. If she refused, she might lose the money that could save the farm. If he went and did not come back, she would have no right to be surprised. The worst part was that she trusted him more than she trusted the road. All right, she said. Everett gave one nod. But you take Jonah with you to Mill Bend, she added. If the merchant is there and buys, Jonah brings the receipt back with you. If you have to go farther, Jonah returns from Mill Bend on Mr. Pruitt's mule and tells me exactly where you went. Everett looked at her, understanding all the words beneath the words. She needed a plan. She needed proof. She needed not to stand at the gate, wondering whether another man had vanished with no witness but dust. All right, he said again. They loaded the wagon fast. Nora chose the best crates herself, laying each apple gently into straw, checking for bruises with hands that trembled only when no one was looking. Everett secured the load with ropes. Lottie packed biscuits and ham into a cloth. Jonah drank water from the pump and tried to look old enough for serious duty. When everything was ready, Everett climbed onto the wagon seat. Nora stood beside the wheel. For a moment, neither spoke. I'll bring back the receipt, Everett said. And the wagon. And the wagon. And yourself if it isn't too inconvenient. His face softened. No inconvenience. Nora looked down, then reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a blue ribbon, one she had used to tie the ledger closed, and looped it around the wagon rail. Everett watched her fingers knot it. For the crates, she said. He knew better than to believe that. I'll mind it, he said. The wagon rolled out under a high September sun. Jonah perched beside Everett like a solemn guard. Nora watched until they reached the bend in the road. Everett did not look back until the last moment. When he did, she was still standing there. Then the wagon disappeared. The farm became too quiet at once. Nora worked because work was what she had. She and Lottie finished the north row, sorted fruit, washed jars, checked the smokehouse, and carried baskets until Nora's arms ached. But every sound from the road pulled her head up. Every wagon creak that was not his felt like a small punishment. By late afternoon, Jonah returned alone on Mr. Pruitt's mule. Nora's heart dropped before the boy even reached the gate. He found the merchant, Jonah called. Axle was broke bad. Merchant wouldn't take the crates, said he had to get back before dark. Mr. Hale went on toward the river landing, said to tell you he'd sell fair or bring them home whole. Nora gripped the gate. He went on alone. Yes, ma'am, he said the road was clear. Lottie muttered something unkind about men and their idea of clear roads. Nora looked west. The sun was already lowering. The river landing was not a gentle trip. The road dipped through timber, crossed two creeks, and cut near Pike Land before opening toward the ferry. A man could make it before night if he pushed. A man could also meet trouble where trees grew close. "He'll be back tomorrow," Lottie said, though her voice held less certainty than comfort required. Nora nodded. She did not sleep that night. She lit the porch lamp and left it burning. Near midnight, wind moved through the sunflowers, making their dry heads whisper against each other. Nora sat in the porch chair with Samuel's shawl around her shoulders and Everett's empty coffee cup on the rail beside her. She told herself she was waiting for the wagon. Not for him. Just the wagon. But when the moon climbed high and the road remained empty, Nora lowered her face into her hands. "Don't make me sorry I trusted you," she whispered. The farm gave no answer. Only the lamp burned on. By dawn, the blue ribbon was still gone from the yard. The wagon had not returned, and far down the western road, dust began to rise beneath a horse that was running too fast. The horse came hard out of the morning haze, hooves striking the road like urgent hands on a door. Nora was already at the gate before she could think. She had spent the last hour standing, sitting, walking to the porch, walking back to the gate, and pretending each movement had purpose. The lamp she had left burning through the night still smoked faintly behind the window, useless now in the pale dawn. Lottie had fallen asleep in the porch chair sometime before first light, her shawl pulled around her shoulders, but the sound of that horse brought her upright at once. "That is not a wagon," Lottie said. Nora did not answer. The rider came closer. It was not Everett. It was Mr. Pruitt's hired boy from the feed store, older than Jonah, thin as a fence rail, riding one of the store horses with his hat nearly blown off his head. He pulled hard at the gate, and the horse threw its head, lathered at the neck. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he gasped, "Mr. Pruitt sent me." Nora's hand found the gate post. "Where is Everett?" The boy swallowed, trying to catch breath. "He's alive." The world narrowed around those two words. Nora closed her eyes for half a second, then opened them sharp. "Where?" "River Road near Pike's timber cut. Wagon stuck in the east ditch. Wheel cracked. Mr. Hale stayed with it. He sent me from Mill Bend after I came across him." Lottie was beside Nora now. "Was he hurt?" "Not bad," he said, "not bad." Nora knew enough about men to understand that not bad could mean anything from a scraped hand to half-dead pride. "What happened?" she asked. The boy shifted in the saddle. "He sold the apples first." Nora stared. "He made it to the river landing late. Found a steamboat cook buying supplies for a northbound boat. Got a better price than Little Rock would have paid," Mr. Hale said. "He has the receipt and the money." Lottie let out a breath. "Thank the Lord." "But coming back," the boy continued, "the wagon hit a washout near the timber road. One wheel split. Maybe from the hard trip, maybe from something in the rut. Mr. Hale wouldn't leave the wagon money alone, so he sent me ahead." Nora had already turned toward the barn. Lottie caught her arm. "Think first." "I am thinking." "No, you're feeling with boots on." Nora pulled free, but not harshly. "Then help me feel faster." Within minutes, the mule was hitched to the smaller cart, tools thrown in the back, along with rope, water, strips of cloth, a lantern though morning had come, and the old rifle from above the kitchen door. Nora placed it under the seat without comment. Lottie saw it and said nothing. Ash stood in the barn, restless, ears forward, as if he knew Everett was somewhere he should not be. Nora paused at the stall just long enough to touch the gray horse's neck. "I'll bring him back," she whispered. Then she climbed into the cart, took the reins, and drove hard for the river road. The road west looked different when Fear rode beside her. Yesterday, it had been the path Everett had taken with her apples, her wagon, and a blue ribbon tied to the rail. This morning, it was a long strip of dust and shadow, running between fields and woods that seemed to hold their breath. The sun climbed pale through a veil of thin cloud. Birds rose from fence posts as the cart rattled past. Lottie sat beside Nora, one hand gripping the sideboard, her bonnet ribbons flying. "You drive like Judgment Day is behind us," Lottie said. "It might be ahead." "Fair enough." They passed Mill Bend before mid-morning. The broken merchant wagon stood near the blacksmith shed with one wheel removed, its owner arguing with a man holding an axle pin. Nora barely looked at it. Beyond Mill Bend, the road narrowed. Trees thickened on both sides. The air smelled of sap, damp leaves, and old mud. Pike's timber cut lay another mile ahead. Nora's fingers tightened on the reins. She had not come this way often since Gideon bought the land. There were places where trees had been taken too fast and the hillside looked wounded, stumps jutting from the earth like broken teeth. Wagon ruts cut deep through clay. Rainwater had gathered in places, hiding holes beneath smooth brown surfaces. Then she saw it. Her wagon sat crooked in the ditch, one rear wheel split at the rim, the axle dropped low. 2 crates remained in the bed, covered with canvas. The mule was tied to a sapling, unharmed but annoyed. Beside the wagon, Everett Hale stood with one hand braced against the sideboard and the other holding a pistol low by his leg. Across from him stood Gideon Pike. Nora pulled the cart to a stop, so hard Lottie grabbed the seat. Everett turned at the sound. Relief moved across his face, followed at once by concern. "Nora," he said, "stay back." That was the wrong thing to say to Nora Whitcomb. She climbed down. Gideon Pike smiled as if he had been waiting for an audience. "Well, the widow arrives." Lottie stepped down behind Nora, and a witness. Gideon's smile thinned. Nora looked first at Everett. His shirt sleeve was torn near the shoulder. There was a dark bruise along his cheekbone and dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He stood steady, but his weight favored one leg. Her heart clenched hard enough to hurt. Then she looked at Gideon. "What did you do?" Gideon lifted both hands slightly. "Careful, Nora. A wagon accident is not a crime." Everett's voice came low. 2 men tried to take the cash box. Nora looked at him. "They came out of the trees after the wheel broke," he said. "Faces covered. One had a club. They ran when they realized I was not unconscious and when Mr. Pike rode up behind them." Gideon shook his head. "A sad thing, lawlessness. Good thing I happened by." "You happened by on your own timber road after my wagon broke in a rut cut fresh across the track?" Everett asked. Gideon's eyes cooled. "You accuse freely for a man with a troubled past." Everett lifted the pistol slightly, not pointing it, only reminding the air that he had it. "And you arrive freely for a man who wants this farm short by $200. Nora walked to the wagon. The blue ribbon was still tied to the rail, dusty but there. She touched it once. "Where is the money?" she asked. Everett reached inside his vest and pulled out a flat leather packet. "Here." He held it toward her. She did not take it yet. "You kept it on you?" "Yes." "Even when they struck you?" "They struck my shoulder first. I fell badly enough to make them hopeful, not badly enough to make them lucky." Lottie muttered, "Men." Nora took the packet with both hands. Inside was the receipt from the steamboat cook and folded bills that smelled faintly of river smoke. Her eyes moved over the numbers. The price was more than fair. It was enough. Not the whole debt alone, but enough that, with what they had already earned and what still waited in tobacco, Silas Greer's number could be met. Nora looked up at Everett. For a moment everything she had been holding back rose to the surface. Fear, gratitude, anger that he had been hurt, relief that he stood before her, the memory of her whisper on the porch in the dark. "Don't make me sorry I trusted you." He had not. Gideon cleared his throat. "You should be more concerned about the kind of man you trust. For all you know, those masked fellows knew him." Everett's face hardened. Nora turned slowly. Gideon had made his mistake. Not because he lied. Men like him lied often and well. Because he thought fear still ruled her. Nora stepped closer, stopping a few feet from him. "I know exactly what kind of man I trust." Gideon's eyes flicked toward the packet in her hands. "He is the kind who could have ridden on with my wagon and money and no one close enough to stop him. He did not. He is the kind who was struck and still kept hold of what was mine. He is the kind who asks what I need before deciding what I owe. And you, Gideon Pike, are the kind who appears wherever trouble benefits you." Lottie smiled a little. Everett lowered his eyes, not from shame, but from the weight of being defended like that. Gideon's jaw worked. "You cannot prove a thing." "Maybe not today," Nora said, "but I can count witnesses. Lottie saw you here. Mr. Pruitt's boy knows Everett was left alone with the wagon. The merchant at Mill Bend knows your road was the only way back, and every man in Willow Creek already knows how badly you want my farm." "That is gossip." "No," Nora said, "that is seed, and you taught this town how fast seed grows when thrown with purpose." Gideon's face darkened. For a moment, Nora thought he might step toward her. Everett thought so too, because he moved despite the pain in his leg, placing himself nearer without crowding her. Then the sound of another wagon came from the road. Mr. Pruitt appeared first, driving fast with the town blacksmith beside him. Behind them rode the sheriff, a heavy man with a sunburned face and a habit of looking tired before noon. Lottie lifted one hand. "About time." Gideon Pike looked at the approaching men, then back at Nora. His expression closed into something hard and careful. The sheriff climbed down. "What's this?" Nora answered before anyone else could shape the story. "My wagon broke on Mr. Pike's timber road after Mr. Hale sold my apple crates at the river landing. 2 covered men tried to take the money. Mr. Pike claims he happened by. I am asking you to make a proper record of all of it." The sheriff looked at Everett's bruised face, the broken wheel, Gideon Pike, and the fresh rut cut across the road. "That's so?" he asked. Everett nodded. "That's so." Gideon gave a dry laugh. "You'll take a drifter's word." The sheriff looked at him. "I'll take everyone's word down. That is what a record is." Mr. Pruitt stepped forward. "My boy found Mr. Hale with the wagon and came for us. He said Pike wasn't there yet when he left Mill Bend." The blacksmith crouched by the broken wheel and the rut beneath it. He ran one hand along the damaged wood. "This wheel hit hard," he said, "but that rut was cut sharp, not washed out." Gideon's mouth tightened. "Are you accusing me too?" he asked. The blacksmith stood. "I am looking at a rut." "Then keep your eyes on dirt, not my name." The sheriff's tired face sharpened a little. "Mr. Pike, you'll come by my office this afternoon." "I have business." "Then bring it with you." For once, Gideon Pike had no clean answer. He stepped back, his gaze moving over Nora, Everett, Lottie, the broken wagon, and the men now standing between him and the story he wanted to tell. His power had not vanished, but it had cracked. That was enough for the morning. "This is not finished," he said to Nora. "No," she replied, "but it is no longer hidden." He mounted his horse and rode away through the timber, slower than he had arrived. Only then did Nora turn back to Everett. "You're hurt." "I'll mend." That is not an answer. It is when you ask while holding a rifle under your cart seat. Lottie looked at Nora. "I wondered where that went." Nora ignored her. "Sit down." Everett looked as if he might argue. Nora pointed to a fallen log. Now, he said. The sheriff and Mr. Prout began discussing how to move the wagon, while the blacksmith inspected the wheel. Lottie took charge of the mule because Lottie liked taking charge of anything with ears. Nora knelt in front of Everett and reached toward the cut at his mouth with a damp cloth from her pocket. He caught her wrist gently. "I'm all right." Her eyes flashed. "I spent the whole night thinking you were not. Do not steal the comfort of seeing for myself." He released her wrist. She cleaned the blood carefully. Her hand trembled once against his jaw. Everett felt it and grew very still. "I sold the apples," he said softly. "I saw. Got a fair price. More than fair. I wanted to come back before dark." "You didn't." "No. You scared me." The words came out plain, almost rough. Everett looked at her, and something in him seemed to give way. "I scared myself," he said. Nora's hand stopped. "Not when the wheel broke, not when those men came at me. I have been in trouble before." He swallowed. "I got scared when I realized that if I did not make it back, you might think I had chosen the road after all." Nora's eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. Around them the men worked, wagon wood creaked, and the mule objected to Lottie's opinions. Yet for Nora and Everett the timber road went quiet. "I did think that," she whispered. "I know. I hated you for near half an hour. I expect I earned some of it." "No, that is the trouble." Her voice broke slightly. "You had not earned it. The fear was old. You only stepped where it was buried." Everett lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to move away. She did not. He touched the back of her hand. "Nora," he said, "I do not know all the answers waiting after November, but I know this. I was not trying to return to the farm just because of the money." She looked at him. "I was trying to return because you were there." The tears came then, quiet and quick. She turned her face slightly, angry with them, but Everett saw. He did not wipe them away. He did not make a grand gesture of comfort. He only held her hand in the middle of that ruined road, with dust on his boots and blood at his mouth, and let the truth stand where both could see it. By afternoon, the wagon was patched enough to move slowly. The blacksmith promised a proper wheel by the next day. Mr. Prout carried the remaining crates back in his own wagon. The sheriff took statements from everyone and left with a face that suggested Gideon Pike would find fewer friendly shadows in town than he had expected. Nora drove the small cart home with Everett beside her. He should have ridden in the back and rested his leg. He tried once to suggest it. Nora looked at him in a way that ended the matter. They reached the farm as the sun lowered into a haze of amber. The sunflowers along the fence were bent heavy with seed, their bright faces darkening at the center. Ash called from the barn the moment he saw Everett, and Everett smiled despite the bruise on his cheek. "Your horse missed you," Nora said. "He missed the possibility of apples." "That too." They carried the money and receipt into Samuel's office. Nora opened the ledger. Her hands were dirty from the road, but she did not care. She laid the bills on the desk, smoothed the receipt, and wrote the sale amount in careful numbers beneath the last entry. Then she added again. "Once, twice, 3 times." Everett leaned against the doorframe, too sore to sit, watching her face. Nora looked up slowly. "With tobacco," she said, "we can pay it." The words did not burst from her. They came soft, almost afraid to be true. Everett closed his eyes for one breath. "We can pay it," she said again, stronger. This time the house seemed to hear. The walls that had held 3 years of silence, the desk that had kept Samuel's papers, the floorboards Everett had crossed as a stranger, the old map hanging crooked on the wall, all of it seemed to loosen around her like a fist opening after too long. If you have stayed this far with Nora and Everett, remember this moment. Sometimes victory does not shout. Sometimes it is just a woman looking at a ledger and realizing the home she fought for is still hers. That evening, after Lottie delivered supper and left with 3 warnings and 1 proud smile, Nora stood on the porch beside Everett. He had a clean cloth tied near his shoulder. His cheek had darkened. He looked tired enough to fall asleep standing, but he stayed beside her as the farm settled into dusk. "You should rest," she said. "I am. Standing is not resting. It is if the view is good." She looked at him, then away, but not before he saw the warmth in her face. The blue ribbon had been taken from the wagon rail and now lay on the porch between them, dusty, wrinkled, but whole. Nora picked it up. "I tied this because I needed something of mine to come back," she said. Everett's voice was quiet. "Did it?" She looked at the ribbon, then at him. "Yes." The word was small, but it changed the air. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Everett reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. Nora's heart tightened. "What is that?" "A letter I wrote in Mill Bend while Jonah was finding the merchant. I meant to send it if the apples sold." "To whom?" "The Colorado outfit." She stared at him. He held it out. Nora did not take it at first. "What does it say?" "It says I will not be coming." The porch seemed to tilt beneath her. Everett looked toward the road, now purple in the evening light. "I do not know what I am to you," he said. "I know what I am not. I am not a man waiting for the first clear morning to leave. Not anymore." Nora's fingers closed around the ribbon. "You gave up your work." "I gave up a place to go." "That was money." "Yes." "And winter pay." "Yes." "And a plan." Everett looked back at her. It was a plan for a man who had nowhere he wanted to stay. Nora could not speak. The fields whispered in the evening wind. A lantern swung softly inside the kitchen. Somewhere by the goat pen, Juniper bumped a fence board as if reminding the world that even great emotional moments should not distract from crime. Everett smiled faintly at the sound, then grew serious. "I am not asking anything tonight," he said. "You have had enough asked of you by men who wanted something. I only wanted you to know before fear had room to make another story." Nora looked down at the letter in his hand. Then she took it. Not as a debt. Not as a surrender. As truth. She held it against her chest and nodded once, unable to trust her voice. Everett did not step closer. He only stood beside her while night covered the farm, and for the first time in years, Nora did not feel the dark entering the house as loneliness. But beyond the bend in the road, Gideon Pike still had money, pride, and one last chance to strike before November. And men like him did not lose quietly. The last days of September passed with a strange quiet over the Whitcomb farm. Not peace exactly. Peace was too soft a word for a place still counting dollars by lamplight and watching the road for trouble. It was more like the stillness after thunder, when the air smelled washed clean but every living thing remembered how hard the storm had come. Everett's bruises darkened, then faded. Nora pretended not to fuss over him and failed in small ways. She left an extra pillow on the cot in Samuel's office. She brewed willow bark tea and called it a habit. She moved the heavier baskets herself until Everett caught her and gave her a look so steady she handed one over without argument. "Your shoulder needs rest," she said. "My shoulder is attached to a man who can still carry apples. And that man is attached to a foolish idea of strength. I've been told worse. By me. Not yet." She looked at him over the basket and the corner of her mouth lifted. "Give it time." Those little exchanges became part of the farm's rhythm, as ordinary and precious as coffee steam in the morning. The tobacco sold fair. Not high, not generous, but fair enough. Mr. Prout helped arrange the buyer, and after what had happened on Pike's Timber Road, no one in Willow Creek wanted to be seen helping Gideon Pike press a widow into ruin. The sheriff's record had done its work. The blacksmith's talk about the cut rut did the rest. Men who had once nodded politely to Gideon now found reasons to look elsewhere when he came near. Silas Greer still stood behind his polished bank counter, but even he had grown careful with his words. The town had not become brave all at once. Towns rarely did. But the truth, once spoken in front of witnesses, had made cowardice harder to dress like courtesy. By the third week of October, Nora sat at Samuel's desk with the ledger open, the final sale money stacked beside the Apple receipt. Everett stood near the window, one hand resting on the sill, watching dusk gather over the orchard. Lottie Bell sat in the chair opposite Nora because she had declared herself official moral supervision, which Nora said was not a real office. "It is when needed," Lottie replied. Nora counted the money. Once, twice, then a third time because Samuel would have. $251.60. Exactly. For a moment, no one spoke. The lamp burned steady. The crooked county map hung above the desk. Outside, ash moved in the pasture, and the goats muttered near their pen as if they too understood a great transaction had taken place and suspected they had been left out of it. Nora placed both hands flat on the desk. "There it is," she whispered. Lottie's eyes softened. "There it is." Everett did not say anything. He only looked at Nora. She turned to him, and in her face was every sleepless night, every mended fence, every jar sealed, every apple sorted, every insult swallowed. Every morning she had risen before dawn because giving up had never once been allowed to sit at her table. "We did it," she said. Everett's expression changed at that word. "We?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, we did." Nora folded the bills carefully and put them in a cloth pouch. She tied the pouch with the same blue ribbon that had gone to the river road and come back dusty but whole. The next morning she went to town. This time Everett did not ride behind her. He rode beside her. Not close enough to look like protection, not far enough to look like doubt, just beside her where the road was wide enough for two. Willow Creek noticed. Men outside the feed store stopped talking. Mrs. Bell, who had insisted on following in her own wagon, waved at everyone with the bright cheer of a woman ready to testify before God and half the county. Mr. Prout came out to the porch and tipped his hat. The blacksmith leaned in his doorway, arms folded, face solemn but pleased. Nora tied the mule before the bank. Everett dismounted beside her. "You don't have to come in," she said. "I know. But you're going to. If you allow it." She looked at the bank doors, then at him. "I allow it." Inside, Silas Greer looked up from his ledger. For the first time since Nora had known him, his face showed no pleasure at her arrival. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said carefully. She walked to the counter and set the cloth pouch down. "I have come to pay the note." The room went quiet. Even the clerk in the back stopped scratching his pen. Silas looked at the pouch, then at Everett, then back at Nora. "All of it. All of it, principal and interest through today. You will count it, write the receipt, mark the note paid in full, and sign it." Silas's fingers tightened around his pen. "That is a very specific instruction. I have learned the value of paper." Everett stood half a step behind her, silent. Silas opened the pouch and counted. His face changed as the money moved through his hands. Disappointment tried to hide behind professionalism, but Nora saw it. So did Everett. At last, Silas placed the final bill on the counter. It appears to be correct. It is correct. He took out the note. Nora watched him mark it paid. She watched him write the receipt. She watched him sign his name. When he slid the paper across the counter, she read every line. Then she folded it and placed it inside her reticule. "Good day, Mr. Greer." She turned to leave. The bank door opened before she reached it. Gideon Pike stepped in. The air tightened. He had not shaved well. His eyes looked tired and his coat hung open as if he had dressed in anger. His gaze fell first on Everett, then on Nora, then on the bank counter where the empty pouch lay. Silas looked uncomfortable. That alone was worth remembering. Gideon's voice came low. "What is this?" Nora stood straight. "This is me leaving." "You paid it." "Yes." His jaw shifted. "With his money." The insult entered the room like smoke. Everett moved one step, but Nora lifted her hand slightly. He stopped. Nora turned fully toward Gideon. "No." Gideon's eyes narrowed. "With apples from my orchard," she said. "With tobacco from my field. With preserves from my kitchen. With eggs, corn, work, sweat, and a fair price from a steamboat cook your road failed to stop. Mr. Hale helped me carry the burden. He did not buy my ground from under me." Gideon looked at Silas. "You accepted it." Silas cleared his throat. "The debt has been paid. The timing is suspicious. The money is legal tender." For once, Silas Greer sounded less like a banker and more like a man trying not to be pulled into a sinking wagon. Gideon stepped closer to Nora. "You think this ends it?" The question was ugly, but it held something desperate beneath it. Nora saw it then. Gideon Pike had not wanted the farm only for its acres. He had wanted her refusal broken. He had wanted the valley to see that everything could be bought if pressed hard enough. But some things did not break. Some things only grew roots deeper. "It ends your claim on my fear," Nora said. Gideon's face flushed. Everett spoke then, his voice calm. "The sheriff is across the street." Gideon looked at him. "And Mr. Pruitt is on the porch," Everett continued. "Mrs. Bell is outside with enough words to fill a court record. So, if you plan to threaten Mrs. Whitcomb again, choose each word like it costs money." For a moment, Gideon looked ready to answer. Then he saw the truth of it. Through the bank window stood Mr. Pruitt. The blacksmith had stepped out too. Lottie Bell sat in her wagon with her chin lifted and both hands folded, looking delighted to be dangerous. Gideon Pike was not beaten by fists. He was beaten by being seen. He turned, opened the door, and walked out without another word. By sundown, half of Willow Creek knew Nora Whitcomb had paid her note. By the next morning, the other half had improved the story twice over. Nora did not care. She placed the signed receipt in Samuel's ledger, closed it, and tied it with the blue ribbon. Then she carried the ledger to the cedar chest in her bedroom and laid it inside beside Samuel's folded Sunday shirt and the letters he had written her during their courting days. For a long moment, she kept her hand on the ledger. "I kept it," she whispered. There was no answer, but she did not need one. The house no longer felt like a place waiting for a dead man's footsteps. It felt like a place still living. The weeks turned colder. The sunflowers were cut and hung to dry. The apple trees dropped their last leaves. Frost silvered the pasture in the mornings. Everett moved from Samuel's office to the small room by the back stairs after Lottie loudly informed Nora that a man who has given up Colorado, faced thieves, and helped pay down fear without buying a single inch of land deserves a bed that does not fold him like laundry. Nora told her to mind her own house. Lottie said she would as soon as Nora stopped being interesting. Everett did not press for more than Nora offered. That was part of why she kept offering more. A drawer for his shirts. a peg for his coat, a place at the table that became his without announcement. Winter came soft at first, then hard. Snow touched the fence rails in December. The goats hated it. Ash tolerated it with dignity. Everett cut wood in the mornings while Nora baked bread and worked on mending by the stove. At night, they sat near the fire, talking sometimes, silent other times. The silence was different now. It no longer asked who would leave. In late January, on the 3rd anniversary of Samuel's death, Nora walked alone to the cedar tree on the hill. Snow lay thin on the ground, and the sky was pale as milk. She stood by the grave with her shawl wrapped tight and a small bunch of dried lavender in her hand. "I was angry," she said softly, "for a long time." The wind moved through the cedar branches. "I thought if I needed no one, I could never lose that much again." Her breath trembled white in the cold. "But the house was quiet, Samuel, too quiet, and I think you would have told me that living like a locked door is still a kind of losing." She placed the lavender near the stone. "He is a good man," she whispered, "not because he fixed what was broken, because he knew what not to touch until I handed it to him." She stood there until her fingers grew cold. When she came down the hill, Everett was waiting by the porch, not close to the path, not watching like a guard, just there, splitting kindling, giving her grief room and giving her return somewhere to land. She stopped beside him. "I'm ready for coffee," she said. He set the axe down. "Then coffee it is." Spring came with apple blossoms. White and pink flowers filled the orchard so thickly that the branches looked dressed for a wedding before anyone had planned one. Bees moved through them with their usual serious purpose. The garden soil softened. New sunflower seeds waited in a paper packet on the kitchen shelf. On a bright April morning, Everett found Nora in the orchard standing beneath Samuel's favorite tree. The Arkansas black tree had not yet fruited, but its blossoms were full, and the air smelled sweet enough to make the heart ache. Everett carried his hat in his hands. Nora turned when she heard him. "You look like a man about to say something difficult." "Not difficult," he said, "important." She grew still. He came no closer than the space between them allowed. "I came to your gate because a sunflower was leaning," he said. "I stayed one day because a fence needed fixing, then another because a roof needed patching. After that I kept finding reasons. Apples, ledgers, wagon wheels, goats with criminal minds." Nora's mouth softened. Everett's voice grew quieter. "But the truth is, I stopped needing reasons a long while ago." The blossoms moved above them in a light wind. "I do not want your farm," he said. "I do not want to stand over you or make your choices smaller. I know you can live without me, Nora. I have seen you do it with more courage than most men live with help." Her eyes shone. "I am asking because I do not want a life that only passes by yours. I want to work beside you, sit across from you, argue about fences, lose apples to ash, and hear you tell sunflowers how to behave until we are both old enough that Lottie finally gets to call herself old with honesty." A laugh broke through Nora's tears. Everett smiled, but his eyes stayed serious. "Will you marry me?" Nora looked at him for a long moment. Once she had thought needing no one meant she was safe. Now she understood something braver. Love was not the same as being unable to stand alone. Love was choosing to stand together when either person could stand alone, and still deciding the together was better. She stepped closer. "Everett Hale," she said, "I still do not need a husband." His face held steady, but only just. Then she took his hand. "But I want one, and I want him to be you." Everett closed his fingers around hers, and the breath he let out sounded like a man reaching home after a road too long to name. They were married in May in the orchard, beneath blossoms bright against a blue Arkansas sky. Lottie cried openly and denied it afterward. Mr. Prout gave them a barrel of flour. The blacksmith fixed the wagon wheel properly as a wedding gift. The sheriff came too, though he claimed he was only there for cake. Gideon Pike did not attend. By then, his standing in Willow Creek had thinned. Men still did business with him when they had to, but no one mistook him for respectable simply because his coat was clean. Silas Greer learned to speak to Nora as Mrs. Whitcomb Hale with the careful politeness of a man who had discovered paper could protect both sides of a counter. And the farm flourished. Not because a man had saved it. Not because a woman had surrendered it. Because two people learned how to tend what mattered. The fences stood straighter, the barn stayed dry, the orchard gave heavy fruit. The sunflowers returned taller than before, bright along the road where Everett had first stopped. Each summer, when the end stalk leaned too far, Nora still scolded it. Everett always noticed. "I know," she would say before he spoke. "I figured," he would answer. And sometimes, in the golden hour before dusk, Nora would stand at the gate and look down the road west. She no longer feared it. The road had brought grief once. It had brought gossip, danger, and men who thought leaving was easier than staying. But it had also brought Everett Hale on a gray horse named Ash, with dust on his boots, silence in his heart, and hands that knew how to mend a fence without claiming the land. So she let the road remain. A road did not have to be an enemy. Not when the right man had chosen to stop. If Nora and Everett's story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional frontier stories where love, courage, and home are one honest choice at a time. Years later, folks in Willow Creek still told the story of the widow who said she needed no husband and the drifter who said he needed no home. They told it at church suppers, beside store counters, and under porch roofs when summer rain came down soft. But Nora always told it differently. She said a sunflower leaned. A fence cracked. A stranger stopped. And sometimes that was how God opened a gate.